It's 7 p.m. Let me call to order the meeting of the Merrimack Planning Board for Tuesday, July 18th, 2017. Let me begin by offering the usual reminders to everyone who will address the board to sign in on the clipboard that's on the table over here. Make sure the microphone's turned on and you're speaking clearly into it so that the folks at home can hear you. Sometimes in the room we can hear you quite well, but if you're not near a microphone, the folks at home will not. So that's what that reminder is all about. Let me also announce that our next planning board meeting after tonight will be on August 1st, 2017 at 7 p.m. in this room, the Matthew Thornton room. Let me also appoint Nelson to a voting position in for Vincent Russo. And with that, that brings us to our planning and zoning administration. I'm sorry. We've also certainly don't have to appoint Bill, but recognize that Bill Boyd is in for a substitute for our usual council representative, Tom Koenig. Thank you, Bill. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Thank you for coming. And with that, Jillian, Planning and Zoning Administrator's report. What do we have?
We have one regional impact determination for item number 4 on the agenda tonight. Brett W. Vaughn, review for acceptance and consideration of a final approval for a 14-lot residential subdivision. This is for an existing lot plus 13 new lots located at 123 Wilson Hill Road. And staff's recommendation is that the board determine that it is not a regional impact as it does not meet the criteria for making that determination.
Thank you for that explanation, Jillian. What's the will of the board with respect to the recommendation on regional impact finding on item 4 for our agenda?
Move approval.
Seconded by Alistair Milnes. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? We are 7-0-0 tonight. Jillian, is there anything else that you'd like for the board?
That was all.
Anything that the board has for staff?
Mr. Chairman, I'm perhaps it's not the right time, but I'm going to say it anyway. I feel we should be remiss if this board doesn't congratulate the Public Works Department and its management and its workers for getting the mess on Amherst Street sorted so fast. I think they did a fantastic job, and I feel we should just put it on a record that we as a planning board thought they did a great job.
Thank you for that reminder, Alistair. I agree with you 100%. And I would also offer some information that some folks may know, but others may not, and that is that it's more than the Public Works Department. The town council and the town administration had planned for that repair in advance, and it was already on the calendar, scheduled and on the agenda to go forward. And the road deteriorated a little too fast, but ultimately it happened quickly because we were ready to do that, or close to ready to do that, because of already previously in place advanced planning. But thank you for bringing that up, and I don't mind offering pats on the back all around. Anything else by members of the board for the staff? Seeing none, the next item on our agenda is item 3, which is William Lestalka as the applicant and Land of Goshen LLC as the owner. Continued review for acceptance and consideration of final approval of a subdivision plan for a 12-lot cluster subdivision. The parcel is located at 6 Watkins Road in the R1 Residential and Aquifer Conservation Districts and Wellhead Protection Area. Tax map 4C, lot 449, and this item was continued from our June 20th, 2017 Planning Board meeting. Jillian, is there anything that we need to know before we hear from the applicant?
Yes, we did receive a new set of plans that was revised since the board last saw them. The current revision addressed the elevation data concern that was raised by MVD, as well as some staff comments. There are still comments left to be addressed, and due to the timing of the submittal, we have not fully reviewed the currently revised plans to determine if the comments initially provided by MVD have been addressed beyond the original comment about elevation. I think there are still a number of questions probably by the board, but I'll let the applicant get the conversation going.
Thank you, Jillian. Is the applicant here? Please come forward.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Chris Guida.
You got to be closer to a microphone than that. If you want to stand up, I can give you a handheld one.
Wasn't even on. I'm a soil and wetland scientist with Fieldstone Land Consultants, and I'm here with Nate Chamberlain, one of our engineers, and Mr. Lestalka tonight as well.
Would you repeat your own name since you were
Chris Guida.
Thank you, Chris.
This is a proposed subdivision, conservation subdivision. We did go before the zoning board and received a waiver to allow for a conservation subdivision in lieu of a conventional and allowing on-site septic. And town water is supplying these lots. There are 12 new lots and one existing lot. Trying to find the overall. So the existing, I'm going to need the other one.
Yeah, grab the handheld one. You can hold it with you.
The existing house is right up here on designated 4C449. The area has a fair amount of wetlands through here. In this area through here with the dark dashed lines. Part of the request for the variance was to allow for this conservation subdivision was to not have to cross these wetlands. So we're really, this proposal doesn't have any wetlands crossings with the exception of a minor impact on this man-made pond here to allow for the construction of the roadway. Part of this pond is also going to serve as treatment for stormwater management, and the outlet structure here is going to be upgraded, and the berm around here increased about a foot, 2 feet, a foot. There's the buffer shown around here, the 100-foot around the perimeter. We are asking for some relief for the existing barn that is within that 100-foot buffer around the perimeter. The soils out here, we did a number of test pits. We did also go before the Conservation Commission. They had some questions as far as the amount of ledge out here. We were actually pleasantly surprised, although there were a few boulders. All these soils out here was well-drained, sandy soils, some outwash and some very well-drained tills. As far as the 4K areas on here, with a conservation subdivision, the state allows for reduced lot size and lot frontage, and they don't actually require a 4K area, but they do require to have an area that allows for a effluent disposal area shown on the plans. So that's something that we will be revising on the plans. We have 4K areas shown now, and as some of the members on the Conservation Commission mentioned, that they kind of overlap basically with the houses and the test pits, but that's something that we will address and show for that effluent disposal area on each lot. Some of the other comments that were in the staff comments and that came up at the Conservation Commission was the slope of the driveways. We didn't have them shown on this plan set, but they have all been graded out and they meet the town's requirements. And Nate can speak to that a little bit more if there's any further questions. That's pretty much it. The whole intent of this subdivision, and being a conservation subdivision for obvious reasons, is it suits itself to this property. It allows for the wetlands and the open space to allow to remain undisturbed, and still allows for the development of the property.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. The first bit of business for the planning board to take up is whether the application is complete. Do the planning board members have any questions of the applicant relative to that question, or any discussion relative to that question of whether the application is complete? If there's none, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that we accept the application as substantially complete.
Is there a second for Desiree's motion? Mike got you first. Let Mike have a second. Any discussion? All in favor of finding the application complete and ready for review, say aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? That's 7-0-0 for completeness. Does the board have any questions of the applicant in general about their proposal, or would like to hear more information?
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I may start off by saying that unusually for a project like this, there is no existing conditions map. We normally get a page, which is usually number 1 page, which shows us where the existing everything is. I mean, if you go up there and visualize the site, and I have been up twice, and I took this with me, and it's still hard to see quite where Watkins Road is in relationship to the existing situation. Yeah, I've seen that, but that isn't what it looks like. I mean, you've shown Watkins Road as though it's a nice straightforward entrance. It is, in fact, it's just like a large earthen turnaround. I mean, in fact, it's hard to believe it was even classed as a road before. So I've certainly had a great deal of difficulty in understanding exactly where everything is in relation to what is there now. And that is my biggest problem with one of my problems. There are a whole host of others. But let's start with saying that it's unusual you have not been able to supply us with a existing what we can see. So it's difficult to know exactly where you want to go. But when I do that, and then I look at on one of your maps, and it sort of says emergency access easement and waterline easements, which appears to run over a neighbour's property, I get even more confused. So would you like maybe to explain to us, if necessary, with a pen or something, to show where things are in now as how you'll get to where you think you want to be?
Sure, absolutely. The part of the, well, it's not confusion, but I agree with your comments. When you walk out there, it doesn't look like this. This is the existing right-of-way that was never constructed. So there's no cul-de-sac here on this large area, but that's basically where it is as far as legally. Those are the boundary lines. The existing road that you're talking about is in this right here. So there are proposed lot lines on here too, but these also are existing here. So the gravel road does go off of the property line onto the abutting property, but again, that's an existing situation that we're not proposing any changes to. Our client did not construct it there. We don't propose to change anything having to do with this lot. The other easement here that you mentioned, I believe this emergency access easement goes up to the water tower, and it allows for passage across of this lot. So that's pretty much it. It's a vague easement that allows for passage to access the water tower.
When you describe Watkins Road and the existing, at least on paper, cul-de-sac, what is that based on? How is that established?
The cul-de-sac, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean up in here?
No. I know that it doesn't exist on the ground.
Oh, right.
So where does it exist, or what gave rise, or what created?
It's a paper street, essentially.
What's that?
It's a paper street, essentially. It's on your
Yep.
tax records and everything. So
Okay, but paper streets have an origin. When did it get there? How did it happen?
it was created when the
I don't have that off the top of my head. I mean, that's the right of way. We'll look into.
shown in all the reference plans. It goes back quite a ways.
Bob, I did look into it, and it appears on a 1974 subdivision plan.
Correct.
For this.
Okay. So a 1974 subdivision is likely the place where that came to be? Okay, gotcha.
Most likely.
As far as the existing conditions, they're shown on the second two subdivision sheets with the topography plans.
Well, good for you, but I struggle like heck with it. I'm still struggling like heck with it.
Yeah, it's not a terribly clear way to present
The-
the information. So
The Watkins Road is basically a gravel driveway to the existing house, and there's a sign out there, and that's about it. And it's not centered in the
And
right-of-way
that's-
or anything.
And if I may say, that's a very polite way to describe what's there. A gravel road to the existing house. It's actually a pretty good rough road, rough piece of earth where people could turn round or dance or anything in there. There's no evidence of a gravel road. Not really, there isn't. Not for somebody who doesn't know what he's looking at. which is, if you like, a member of the planning board going out to look, I can't see evidence of a gravel road when I leave Amherst Road. It just looks like driving into the woods.
It's a gravel driveway, dirt, gravel. I mean, I'm not sure how to describe it, whether it would be a dirt driveway or a gravel driveway.
I won't be
Typically,
rude. I've got a word, but I won't do so.
I mean, it's certainly not an ideal situation, but that's what exists.
All right, got it.
Since we're talking about the emergency access road, it appears on a number of different subdivision plans in the area, and it appears to be an emergency access road that goes to Scott Drive, or Scott Circle, up behind this subdivision, and I believe it's for emergency access to that subdivision.
I think the old plans, like the USGS and stuff, show a water tower up there. I think it was originally an access to a water tower, but
I think it's still up there.
On the
water line
Watkins
still comes down.
compound plan, it does show as an emergency access to that subdivision.
Okay.
All right.
I mean, there's an old ACP water line that comes down through there. So.
Right. We're not proposing any changes to that easement, if you will, to access there.
Well, you've got to be. You're going to have to pave it. So, I mean, you are proposing.
I meant legally, the easement as it's described.
All right.
So, based on the discussion so far, one of the things that we'd like to see as we move forward is an existing conditions plan, which, you know, clearly identifies what's there and how it's being used, and to the extent you can take off some of the things that are proposed or paper or non-existent, so that the drawing becomes less cluttered.
Absolutely.
That would help in the clarity of it, for all of our benefit.
We can certainly add that sheet. Would the board prefer a single sheet? I mean, sometimes the scale at that scale gets a little bit harder to read, or at the same scale that these are.
So actually, my own preference would be to use single sheets much more often than you have. I found it very difficult to go through your plan set and piece together what the whole thing is.
Yeah.
And
I understand.
Alistair, do you have other comments before?
Oh,
we
I've got a
pass them
string
on?
of others, but please let somebody else have a go.
All right, I was going to let you go ahead and run down them.
No.
All right, Desiree, let's have you. Your
Just,
thoughts and input.
I don't know if you have it in this with the set, but if, I don't mind bullet plans if there's a key plan that explains what each, like this is like what sheet to go for each section of it, so you can put it back together. So whatever you end up doing, especially even with what you've provided right now, I don't know if it's just not in my set, but I don't see one.
You mean an overall sheet?
Yeah, an overall that has the like,
Right.
you know, like detail bubble around it saying this area
A
is
match
the
line
sheet.
or right.
Yeah, something like that would be great. Yeah.
Okay. Other comments or questions? Mike?
If you could just give us some information about the drainage system, it wasn't
Mike, I
clear
don't
to
think
me.
you're on. Oh, you're just. Oh,
All right. Yeah, if you could give us a little bit more information about the drainage system. It wasn't clear to me if it's an open drainage system along the road, and then just a little bit of history on the existing pond, and again, what your proposed changes are. I didn't see any topography lines that indicate the contour changes, so if that information is available on the existing plan, so if you could point that out.
So on this sheet, this is kind of an overall, but I know it's what you're looking for without the proposed on there. These are the proposed contour lines, the grading lines. Right now, it's open drainage. There's no closed drainage, with the exception of, in order to tie into this existing culvert, which comes out of the pond, and to stay on our property, we are proposing one structure there to basically tie into that culvert, because it discharges off of our property onto the abutting property.
It comes on. It's going this
Oh,
way.
my mistake. It comes onto it. It discharges here. My apologies. I don't, off the top of my head, have the permit number for this pond, but I'm pretty sure we have it in the notes here. So it was a man-made pond. There's a man-made outlet structure here with a weir, if you will, to control the heights with flashboards. Our proposal is essentially to grade this road and the lots, basically, to flow down and utilize the existing pond as detention. It's hard to see here, but there are some proposed grading lines here which raise this berm about a foot, which allow for more storage in that pond, and maybe Nate
Sure, I
can
can
speak a little
speak
bit
to
more to that.
So as Chris was saying, essentially we have the proposed road that comes in here, and we ride a ridge, an existing ridge in the property. And the road sheds to either direction to an existing valley that runs down here behind the houses. And so all that gets down into this existing pond on the, I guess the north side. It rides down into an existing low point here, and there's a culvert that comes into the structure that he had mentioned. And there's also Amherst Street drainage that comes in and dumps right here and gets into the pond as well. So this pipe is essentially on the surface. So we pulled back a section of the pipe and we put a manhole here, and we're piping it into this, with the junction here, and then it comes into the pond. So basically carrying the Amherst drainage down into the pond, and we have flow from offsite coming in into the pond, and then we have flow from the subdivision coming down to this location and into the pond. And then we also have, this is all sheet flow down into the pond as well. And then, as we mentioned, we're raising the grade slightly in here. There's an existing concrete outlet structure there, like as Chris mentioned, with wooden flashboards. And it looks like there was photos submitted in the drainage analysis that was submitted to the town. It looks like there was originally a grate on top of that, but that's since been removed. So we're going to replace that drainage structure with a new one, with the metered control, basically mimicking what's there now. And then, based on our calculations, the existing berm, there's not enough height in the existing berm even to meet the flows, to meet the current regulations, current standards per se. So typically you want a 1 foot of freeboard in the 50-year storm. So the proposed modification down here, we attain that. We maintain the existing flows out of the pond. And there's further details of that given back in the details. There's a section through there right here. So this section shows us, this is the existing driveway right here, gravel driveway, and the property line is identified right here. And so we're shifting that whole thing over, and here's the proposed road centered in the existing right-of-way, paper street, whatever you want to call it, that was established in 1974. And here's our proposed road here. And then, so here's that drainage structure we were just referencing. Here's the existing head wall where the flow comes in from the north, and it flows into the pond here. And so we're going to take this, drop a drainage structure here. I'm going to tie in the Amherst Street Road runoff. We're going to tie in the flow from the proposed road in, and then it all comes out into the pond here. And then this is the downstream end. So you can see this is the existing berm. These grid lines are 2 feet, so it looks like about 1.5 foot rise here that we're proposing to increase the height of the berm. And then the width of the berm is 10 feet, so you can use it to walk by, you can pass over it to get to it and maintain it and whatnot. So.
Also,
And the other thing, excuse me, the other thing is right now the outfall from this existing outlet structure, there's no head wall on the outfall, so we're proposing to place a head wall on here and put some erosion control material, a plunge pool at the outfall. So that's an improvement as well. So.
utilizing the pond also allows us to utilize the existing structure, and it prevents us from having to create a whole new detention structure. So our impact is, our footprint or just land disturbance is a lot less. We're just trying to utilize what's on site for more than one purpose. I'm not sure the exact purpose of the pond creation, whether it was a wildlife pond or a fish pond or just aesthetically why it was created, but it lends itself to be able to serve more than one purpose. So.
Could you speak to just the upper section of the road and the sloping that you've done there, and just how you felt comfortable with the design, not creating any sort of erosion issues, and/or that the property owners wouldn't modify their properties such that it would impact the runoff there. Basically, what's the reason?
talking about
for
up in here?
Yeah, what's the reason for not going with
So-
closed drainage or some other roadside swale system?
So the whole intent here is, we could do your standard cut with a ditch, but then you have a point discharge. And this is going to be taken out with the lot development anyway. So we figured the intent here is just slope this off so you have a nice continuous slope, because there's a low, there's like a natural swale back here. And then when the lots come in, they'll grade up from these grades, and so you'll create a shallow swale basically along the right of way. Kind of what we've shown here. So it's very gentle, and that way you don't have an erosion problem with a standard ditch. If we propose a standard ditch through here, you're going to punch these driveways through, and then you'll have to put in driveway culverts and everything else. This way it just sheds naturally. It's less impact and less cost. I mean, we've shown a couple, when we get down low here, we've shown where driveway culverts will be required, because this flow comes back down to this area and then down to this low point here. I mean, we can this is our attempt to. It actually increases our our grading for the road.
Right.
We can certainly regrade it if that's a concern and put your standard road ditch in there.
I believe the intent is to utilize the existing contours of the land. So because that is a ridge, it allows us, we're cutting that ridge down, but it also allows us to maintain that height so you don't have the flow back onto the roadway. So
Right.
typically we want to have everything shed off the roadway and not create any problem coming back on. So that allows us to do that without having to add additional structures at the driveway crossings.
And I think that logic makes sense. However, my concern would be just how the property owners will feel. It seems like water will be coming at their buildings, and certainly with some of the locations that you're proposing, it seems like they're in that valley that you're talking about that water currently travels. So my concern would just be that they're going to make modifications to their properties that might alter that significantly, that could affect others, and it just seems like there's a potential for some issues with that going forward. So again, if you can address it, if you felt like you feel comfortable that that's not going to occur, or that the way that this is designed is different than the perspective that I have, certainly be willing to hear your argument on that.
Right. I understand your perspective, and it does make sense. I mean, each lot is going to have its own development, depending on who buys the lot and what type of house goes on there. There's always going to be some type of site work, and that is going to be one of those things where they'll have to, plan the site work accordingly to the road conditions. Pretty much any road conditions, you're going to want to work with the contours of the land. Typically, works better.
Yes and no. Obviously, the person that buys a lot there and builds on it has to answer those questions and solve those problems, but you're not helping them out. I mean, you're leaving it up to them to sort that out as it comes when they get built.
We could certainly look at, alternatives there and ditch lines and I mean, to isolate, you're looking more to isolate the road drainage within the right-of-way rather than having it travel onto the
Yeah, and actually, I
lots.
think we've got a regulation, because I remember seeing a situation come up where someone was going for a CO and their driveway didn't have any barrier to stop the roadway water running down the driveway into the house, and they were not able to get their CO until they solved that problem recently for that. You absolutely got to keep the road water out not running towards the houses and the buildings. Especially because the very next thing that happens after that water runs down the driveway is somebody says it's the town's problem to come fix.
Right.
So,
We'll definitely take a look at that, and we'll go over it with DPW. As Jillian mentioned, some of these comments I think haven't been fully gone through yet, but we definitely will take those under consideration and make the changes necessary.
Can I come back again then? Let me start with some of the other things that I've noticed.
we didn't give Nelson a turn yet.
Oh, sorry. Nelson, you have your go.
You don't have enough time this evening for all of mine. You brought up a few things as just to piggyback on what you've said.
Yeah.
One thing I notice is the absence of sidewalks in this
Yep.
subdivision, and I feel they are a necessary part of a subdivision like this, which is clustered, close grouping of houses, and in need of pedestrian safety, and I think it should be included here, as our regulations suggest. So that will affect what you're saying here with regard to this drainage, I'm sure, because you've got to take account of that some way. I have a lot of questions. I don't know where to begin with this, Bob. I can start at the top and ask.
Pull a thread and
Go on,
Go
Nelson,
through
keep
it.
going.
All
It's
right.
probably the same as mine.
All right. That said, first of all, I wanted to ask about the ownership of the open space. This open space that seems to be mostly on the, I guess this is the east side of the property, with some wetland in it. What is the proposed,
Can't be wetland.
pardon?
They're not allowed to consider wetlands as part of the open space.
No, but it's there. And
Oh, yeah.
my question really is who's going to own that, and what form of ownership is that going to be?
Yeah, well, right now, I believe it's going to be a homeowners association ownership, so there'll be a partial ownership through all the lots.
With, I would expect some conservation,
then you got to put a
easements.
conservation easement on it.
is that,
There certainly can be, yeah,
yeah, I would expect it to be,
right.
okay?
And could I just add on that,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
the common land is supposed to be 50% of the total development. I can't work out, if you take out the wetlands, that you've got 50%.
Well,
There's no wetland stipulation on it. It's 50% of the total tract less the right-of-way.
I'm sorry, sir, you haven't read 3-08.
It should be on the plan.
13F. For the purpose of cluster residential development, the common land areas and natural areas are considered to be part of the and shall not be considered to be, the following shall not be considered open space land. Farmland, forest, wetlands, and you're supposed to have 50%.
I'm fairly certain that it does meet those requirements, but we will certainly vet that and make sure that it does.
Yeah, if there's not a table, why don't you provide that with us so we have that
We
evidence?
need to see it tabled.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, continuing with the open space, how do the homeowners in this organization access the open space?
All their lots abut the open space, so they can essentially just walk out their backyard. There's also, so all these homes basically abut the open space.
Yeah, what about the ones on the other side of the street?
And there's also, the open space continues all along the perimeter, and there is access here on this cul-de-sac. All this frontage here is within this open space lot.
So you're not proposing any particular access, you just saying, go through your backyard, wherever that leads?
Yes.
Or go through your neighbor's backyard in many cases?
Well, as I said, I mean, all of these abut the open space. It does go around the perimeter here, as well as this frontage here on Watkins Road is part of the open space. So if they didn't want to go through the yard, or if someone else wanted to access it, they could park here and walk through here.
But how far can you walk? It's a pond and wetland.
No, this is all dry land right here. So there's,
Right, but it doesn't connect to the other dry land.
no, it does. It comes right down through here, and then it comes around here through this, where the discharge structure is. And then it connects through. I mean, this is wetland, but it's not. It's forested wetland. It's not like you're walking through a 10-foot deep stream. You wouldn't even know it was wetlands right now.
Okay.
I mean, you may know it's wetlands, but what I'm saying is it's not standing water. It's a forested wetland. It's not. This area here is a seasonal stream. All this area up in here is forested wetlands, which is basically forest. It's all trees. It runs seasonally in the springtime.
But forest is also discounted for the 50%.
I don't know the specifics off the top of my head, so I don't really want to.
What
Argue.
regulation are you citing? I'm sorry.
Because forest, that doesn't make sense. That forest.
How can you not have forest in your open space?
If you have an undeveloped lot, it's going to be forested.
But it says forest and wetlands.
But it makes no sense.
You
want forest and open space.
What's the section number on that, Bob?
It is 308, 3.08F.
Of the zoning,
Of zoning, yeah.
yes.
I mean, they can make a
So-
paved open space, but that would be the most.
So all of this falls under 308.
13F?
Which is, yes, I didn't. Open space within a cluster subdevelopment shall be protected by recreation and conservation easements and shall be conveyed to the property owners to be maintained as a permanent open space or shall be permanently protected in other suitable ways so as to guarantee the following, and it's A, B, C, D, E, and F, is current use limitation. For purposes of the cluster residential development option, the common land areas, open space areas, natural areas in an improved development are considered to be part of the residential use of such development and should not be considered to be an open space land. That's a different thing, though. It's current
for
use
current
is
use.
a
All
tax
right,
law
okay.
qualification.
I'm
It's a-
confused.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah, because
yeah, that's to determine whether it can be in current use tax. It
Yeah.
can't,
yeah,
wouldn't be.
okay. Okay, continuing.
Please, yes.
Do we need a table? Have we satisfied?
Yes, there's
that
got to be a table.
We still want a
Yes,
table.
yes.
I do,
Of
yes.
How much is wetland, and that he's made the.
I'd like to
Okay.
see a table of the site.
It should be on the plan.
Wetlands, recreation,
Open
whatever.
space.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I don't mind adding together whatever is allowed to be called open space, whether that's wetlands or forest, but I definitely want to see the calculation of open space. Because, if you were 80-20, it wouldn't be a question, but you're right on 50-50, right?
No, we got quite a bit extra.
I thought I saw a calculation or a comment somewhere in a note that said it was 50-50.
So.
You got to be by a microphone.
11 acres of open space is required, and we're providing 12.7. So we've got about 1.6 acres more. I don't know what the percentage is.
Where did I see? Does anybody recall seeing the same thing?
It's just above note 14.
Just above 14.
No, I know what he's saying, but anybody saw the same 50-50 thing that I was
Yes.
thinking of?
Oh, and a comment?
Oh,
No. A
it's
comment.
on note 14.
No,
It's
it's
right
14.
above, right here.
Okay.
Okay.
But you were thinking that maybe you saw a comment from staff that addressed the 50-50 issue?
I thought I remembered that.
Yeah.
But let me look for it while we're talking. Nelson, please continue, and if I find it,
Okay.
I'll bring it up, and if I don't,
Okay, the next thing on my list was already pointed out was the absence of calculations showing the driveway slopes. And it looked like some of those driveway slopes exceeded our 8% requirement.
It's
And,
10%. And
Pardon?
It's 10%, and none of them do.
Well, okay.
I'm not sure how they made that assessment based on what the plans that were submitted, but we've gone and looked carefully at all the driveways and all the lots grayed out.
That data should be submitted with the plan, and it isn't, as far as I can tell.
Sure, we'll definitely provide that.
All right. The 100-foot required buffer, being part of the private land bothers me, especially on such small lots where the housing, well, first of all, the housing is on top of the leach field, the reserved area. So that needs correction. In some way, you've got to have both a house and a leach field on the lot within the setbacks.
Right, that's
Okay, you
correct.
can't put one on top of the other.
Right, and that's what I alluded to earlier, that with an open space subdivision, the 4K area is not required, but showing the effluent disposal area, basically the leach field, the size of the leach field is. Those are not shown on the plan. We will make that correction and make sure we show those on the lots that meet the requirements.
Well, they're shown on the lots, but they're
well, they're,
shown.
No,
they're not
what's
showing
shown
the
is-
4,000 foot. They're showing the potential area that the test.
Right.
But I don't want to cut off this discussion.
Okay.
But I also think we were maybe a little incomplete with what we wanted on the driveway slopes. And so I wanted to add a little bit to that at some point,
Yeah.
but keep going with what you're going, I'll circle back to it. in a
Yeah,
second.
okay, what I would expect on the driveway slopes is in each individual driveway and spelling out what the slope is
Well-
to the potential garage site.
The problem with that, these aren't, we're not designing this final design. The
That's
homeowner's
a-
gonna come in here and put what they want on there, and we can put a note on there saying all, if they exceed, if they need to come back for a waiver or whatnot to get their house to work. We've proved out what's shown on the plan. But that's not, we've got a big note on there that says this is conceptual and it's subject to change once they get developed.
No question, and that's normally the case in a subdivision. But when there's some doubt about whether you can establish the driveways as within the regulations, and you've got to actually show us and demonstrate it, you're essentially getting yourself confined to putting the house in the driveway in that location, even though that wouldn't normally be a requirement of a planning board review, because that's the only place that the driveway works. Now, we just had a subdivision where it got cart ahead of the horse, and we had to look at someone after they built it, and it wouldn't meet the 10%, and then they're coming here hat in hand looking for some relief, when if they had
Sure.
designed it right and done it right in the first place, they wouldn't have done that. I don't want to be in that situation again with a subdivision where somebody says, hey, it's already built and, you can't make me tear it out, or please don't, or that would be a tragedy, all that kind of stuff. So
No, we can
the
certainly
thing is-
prove out all the lots, we can't lock them into that specific design, because the house can change, the location can change.
I can tell you that if you have one of the homeowners show up here in 5 years saying, my driveway's 11%, but it's already built, and what will you do for me? What am I supposed to do? Tell them no? Tear out the driveway? I mean, lawfully that's what we can, but we try to have a little bit of compassion for somebody that's in that situation. But the way to fix that problem is right here tonight, get it right. Show me that the driveways are buildable at 10%, and then that's likely where they're going to have to get built, unless the lot is so easily accommodated for the driveway slope that it isn't a question. And maybe most of them are. But establishing it on the plan, establishing the satisfaction of peer review, it may be ultimately boxing you in to actually have that homeowner build that, because if that's the only way the driveway works, I don't want to have them coming back here saying, well, I decided to ignore all of that, build whatever I felt like, and now my driveway's 12% or 11% or 10.5%. Please forgive me. You get me?
Yeah,
Right.
understood.
Can
We'll
I add a-
definitely, we'll show that grading that meets the requirements on.
Can we add a note that basically, when you do that, right, you then say that the grading plan has been shown to demonstrate compliance with this requirement. However, if the homeowner can demonstrate that they can achieve this in
Yeah.
a similar, different
Sure.
configuration, that can be acceptable by the building department or planning.
Yeah,
So
I
this way,
think
it
that makes
doesn't
perfect
completely
sense.
box you in.
Right. No,
If
that sounds
someone
good.
wants to make some modifications with retaining walls or whatever, but it gives us the assurance.
Right. Has to comply.
Yeah.
So, Nelson, thank you for allowing me to weigh in some
No,
more on
it's
driveways.
quite all right. It's an important part of this, and I would I second everything you said there. The drainage study, there must have been a drainage study
Yes.
submitted with this, and I guess I'd like to get a copy of that at some point, Jillian. I'd like to look that over. I was kind of following what he was showing me there, but because the little red light doesn't show up so well from this distance, I couldn't quite stay with him.
That was
I think it needs new batteries.
Maybe a brighter battery, yeah. And I wanted to know if Watkins Road right now was an accepted street by the town. Is that,
It's highly unlikely, because it's not,
Pardon?
doesn't meet any it's unlikely because it doesn't meet any road standards. I think it's
Yeah.
just a paper street with a driveway through it.
okay, so, but ultimately then Watkins Road will become accepted.
Or you'll propose that it be.
You will,
Correct.
it's
Yeah, it's gonna
intended
be
to
a town road.
become a town road, this
Yes.
whole thing all the way up the hill.
Yep.
Okay. I didn't know that. Let me see. Yeah, the barn in the buffer is not something I would condone at all. I mean, that buffer is meant as a buffer to the neighbors, and leaving the barn there is not something that,
Thank you for that one. Nelson, I want to elaborate a little bit on that and maybe get some thoughts from Jillian on it.
Yeah.
So, a buffer and a setback are similar concepts, but legally kind of different. Buffers are something that the planning board sets out to say landscape this, or it needs to be wooded, or it needs to be a fence, or something like that. Whereas a setback is a zoning thing that you need a variance to change or affect. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Yes.
In this case, is this a buffer, this 100 feet, is where it's within the planning board's purview to decide what to do with the barn? Or does he need a variance to build a barn in what would be a planning board buffer?
The buffer is in the zoning ordinance, and it outlines specific things that can happen in the buffer. So if it's not one of those specific things, which it's not, then I would say it would need a variance to be there.
Okay. So the planning board doesn't have the authority to approve it or disapprove the barn. It's up to the zoning board to take up that consideration.
I think the planning board can certainly discuss it and talk about the merits of the buffer, but ultimately the variance would decide.
Okay,
if
that's what I
it's there or
wanted to
not.
know. I'm with Nelson that I think that building something in a buffer defeats the buffer. I mean, really isn't a way around to say that you kind of satisfy the intent of the regulation by doing exactly what the regulation says not to do.
Right. Our hope would be that since it's part of the existing house and homestead and they're utilizing it now, that would be something the board would entertain to allow that use to continue. It's not a proposed new construction, it's existing, which I don't know.
And you're
if that
proposing to
makes-
take it up as a variance. That's what the
Well,
plan says.
yeah, you would have to because
Yes.
what Jillian says
That's
it would
what
have
the
to be
plan
done.
says.
And so, the zoning board can, take up that question. Sort of saying, well, it exists, can I keep it, is something that could be a part of anybody's proposal. I've got some things here that I don't want to comply with, but it's already there. Can I leave my oil drums buried in the backyard, or whatever else that's going on there? I don't know. To me, that makes an argument for how a buffer is achieved by not a buffer. The whole
Certainly.
purpose of the cluster is to have this, and it's a pretty extensive. It's 100 foot. It's a big buffer that's intended to keep clusters shielded from the things that are around them. And I don't know how you get there by not doing it. So.
But isn't it a situation where this is an existing lot, right, and that structure was built in accordance with the setback requirements, and now the additional lots, which essentially constitute the cluster, even though this one would be included, meets all the criteria of the buffer. It's just that one, since it gets included, doesn't.
That's correct.
So to me, that would be, it was in compliance prior.
Well, and if it was going to be a conventional lot, and you laid this out so that it was sized and frontaged and treated as a conventional lot, then you would say, okay, well, it's not part of the cluster. It doesn't have to have a buffer around it at all.
Okay.
It doesn't have to have its own septic or do any of the other things that are related to cluster. And I suppose you could come up with a subdivision that would carve off one lot first and then cluster the others, conceptually anyway. But it isn't a conventional lot. It's one of the clustered lots. Anyway, I don't want to obsess on the barn and the setback. I have a real tough time with that one. But also, I think a little further down, some of your houses, and looks like one of them, number 449-4, is practically in the buffer as well.
3 and 4, Mr. Chairman.
And in any case, structure or no, it's supposed to be a woodland buffer or forested buffer, and that's going to be somebody's backyard. I mean, they're going to mow it. They're going to put a swing set in it. They're going to do backyard kind of things in it, which are all inconsistent with being a buffer.
I think it's called a landscape buffer, isn't it?
Yeah, landscape buffer, but not
It's not very specific.
not developed land, not somebody's backyard and their barbecue.
Right. I mean, the proposal right now is this dark line is the edge of cutting, but
I see your point that it is close to the proposed house.
Yeah, I mean, really isn't anything that homeowner can do going out his back door that isn't going to intrude on that buffer. And maybe some of those things are okay, or maybe they're not, or maybe we sort of understand them a little bit better. But I'm starting off with a lot of skepticism for how that could be a buffer if, sooner or later the guy's going to buy a pool or, put a deck or, so everybody does something in their backyard, right?
How about putting a leach field in?
Well, the leach field area should be drawn outside the buffer.
It shouldn't be in there. No,
Well,
I don't think that's an
right.
allowable use.
No.
I'm just wondering where the leach field would go.
Well, that's a good question, too. That was
Right, those
one
are
of my original
those
questions.
are one of the items that I said we will definitely show on there. Right now it meets. We're showing it meeting the requirement. I understand that it's close, but the buffer's 100 feet. It's not 105 feet, or 110, or it's not 95. So, right now it meets the requirements. I definitely understand your comments, and we can look at perhaps there would be a smaller home that we're going in there.
I don't know if I agree with you that it meets the requirements. You're absolutely correct that the building is not in the buffer, but there's clearly a situation where the person that lives there has to make use of the buffer area as their backyard.
That could,
As their, yeah,
and they wouldn't be allowed to create a lawn back there. It would have to be wooded as it is now.
well, I don't want to have the town put in a position where somebody's got to ride by and check and care, because we don't regulate that way and police that way. It needs to be something that sort of makes some sense to start with, and when you design something that the homeowner really can't avoid building something in that buffer,
Yeah, but and then we got another.
they're going to affect the
Problem.
landscape buffer.
This is only 50 feet.
I'm not sure if that meets the spirit or the
There-
intent or even the letter.
We
of
can
the
certainly look at that lot and any other lots that are close and perhaps reposition the homes, the proposed homes on there. Again, these are conceptual homes. We're not sure, we have no idea if that's going to be the home that's constructed there. Again, we want it to work. I understand your comments. It goes along with the driveways as well. So we'll definitely take a look at that and see if we can reconfigure that.
Can I add a further nail in the problem? Is the fact you've shown a 50-foot turnaround at the end of as a cul-de-sac. I'm not speaking for Captain Manueli, but I'm sure he'll probably say yay. I don't think 50 foot is going to be satisfactory to the fire department. From I think everything we know is that will not provide a turnaround for a fire engine. In fact, it wouldn't provide a turnaround for a school bus. So I suspect you're going to have to increase that turnaround at the end, which further makes 449-4 even less space to play around with. I really think you've got a problem, certainly with that particular lot.
The cul-de-sacs, if I may, the cul-de-sacs per the town regulations.
You're not allowed to have it grassed in the centre. It has to be subject to the fire department approval. And from everything historically we've dealt with, is 50 foot is not considered satisfactory to swing a fire engine in there. Now, given you've got cluster developments, the fire department will have to sign off on it. And while I'm not going to ask Captain Manueli to say anything, I think you'll find that 100 foot will be much more what they looked at. A 50 foot is inadequate to turn a modern fire engine round.
We could certainly talk to the fire department and we'll.
I would
work with them.
urge you so to do, because I would hate you to try and get that through him. He's only sitting at the back of the hall. You can always have words in with him, but I think he won't like 50 foot. And you certainly can't have it paved grassed in the centre.
So I think that 50 feet probably is too small, but I also agree with the notion that we're not going to put anyone on the spot to try to sort out that question here tonight. Ultimately, for our approval, you've got to get the fire department to sign off on it and satisfy that. The only reason that it comes up and is of any importance to our discussion here more than it normally would is if you have to make some adjustments to the way the roadway is laid out, it's going to change your lot configuration too, and you got a pretty delicate balance going on there, and you got a lot going on. It doesn't appear to be a situation where we can look at it and sort of see, well, they've got some room, and we can understand that compliance is pretty well assured. It's tough to see that from here, and although I'm confident in your engineering skills and your ability to work that out, it isn't readily apparent how you'll do that to me. So that's why discussing the turnaround and the roadway is of particular importance. If you had all the space in the world to do it, and you had big lots and all those kinds of things where you could easily increase the size of the turnaround, I think we could all sit back and say, well, whatever the fire department says, it'll all work out in the wash. But because of the tight lot, I'm not sure I can see that from here.
We'll definitely work through it, make it
Okay.
acceptable to everybody.
Makes sense to me. Nelson?
One final thing. Well,
Final?
Semi-final. This access road that goes to the water tower you mentioned, presently crossing another lot 450, 4C450, is now, it looks like the driveway is now in that lot. And it looks like, if I'm reading this right, page 6 of your plans, you're going to run that driveway through lot 449 only and connect in that way. Is that a correct interpretation, and you intend to abandon the right-of-way across lot 450?
So you're saying this, to access 449, this proposed driveway here would be in lieu of the
Yes,
existing
that's what I'm
driveway?
asking.
Yep. That is the existing driveway. I suspect there may be some easements having to do with that being on the abutting property. I don't know off the top of my head. I can talk with our surveyor a little bit and see what they came up with as far as boundary research, and if that does exist, an easement to allow the existing uses. But right now, our proposal, yes, is to stay on our own property and basically utilize that and abandon
And
that.
abandon the other.
Right.
Okay, it's kind of hard to tell because both are shown on this plan.
Right.
So you don't know which one you're.
Whose use is it that you're accessing? Is the water? You said water tower a bunch of times, and it's still there. Is that functioning? Does that belong to someone? Is that part of the town's water system? What's going on with what's up there?
Who has the right of way? Yeah, who has the?
Who owns the access or the road right away?
This, let me see, there was a note here. It was a,
Is it on the subdivision plan? What's that? Is it on the subdivision plan? The note for the easement? The other way.
there is a reference given here to a book and page. It's somewhat of a vague easement. I'll read it just for the board. It says emergency access easement and water line easement, quote unquote, over and across the existing gravel road, and it gives a volume, book and page. So I'm not exactly sure who has the rights to that. It's a right to pass. I'm not
Okay,
sure
so
if
it's
for
whoever owns that
everybody.
lot to the north of you guys.
Right.
It
Okay.
continues up to Scott Drive.
Okay.
There's the water tank, and I believe it's MVD's water line easement, and the emergency access is to the town to get to Scott Drive.
Makes a lot of sense.
There
Has
is
anybody had
another-
a conversation with the person that owns that lot in the water tower about whether they are consent to having their easement moved?
I'm not aware of that conversation yet, but we'll certainly
I mean,
look
they
into
probably
that.
don't give a,
Yeah.
but,
Whatever word you had in mind.
but they do have the right to object to it or to know about it or consent to it because it's deeded to them, the easement.
Right.
So,
And certainly, when they build the new road, an easy way to get to that old easement will be gone, right?
Right.
And so they'll need to know that they're accessing it now through that property.
Yeah.
And that they're given rights to access it in that fashion, right?
Right, and that small section of road that does go off of our property, that may have rights as well on that lot. So that where it cuts the corner,
Right.
that may be okay, it may be under an easement. That's something we'll look into to verify. I'm
Yeah.
not sure how to solve it otherwise, rather than reposition it completely onto our property, but
does it say, what does it say again? Access and water line easement?
Emergency access, Mr. Chairman.
Does it say emergency?
Well, the quotes are, which is part of the thing, would be over and across the existing gravel road. So it's allowing passage along the existing utilized way, if you will, the road. It doesn't necessarily prohibit
there being access somewhere else, as long as an access is maintained.
Right, but that's not quotes.
But again, we'll have to dig into that a little bit with the surveyor, so as far as the legal specifics on that.
Yeah, my experience with that is where I had rights through an access, and I was held accountable every time wheel ruts went out and that sort of thing. It can get very, very challenging for certain property owners who don't like you going outside. So that's my concern, is that you protect that interest as well as the property owner's interest.
I think that that's valid, and I agree with Mike, but the concern that I saw is that your lot to the north decides, hey, I'd like to subdivide my lot, and I've got this access easement. I'd like to build my roadway right through it, and it's sitting on 449. You know, your fellow that's on 4C 449 may not be thinking that that's 50 feet, a 50-foot wide easement that's going to be developed into a new town road.
Mm.
And I don't, maybe not, maybe it's all wetlands up there and nobody's ever gonna build anything. But your abutting owner may look at that access easement, not as an emergency access, but as a potential for them to get to their
Right,
lot.
we'll have to look at the verbiage on that and see exactly what it's allowed for, whether it's just for emergency access to the abutting Scott Road, Scott Drive you mentioned, or whether it's limited to that or not.
Makes sense to me. Thank you for being willing to look into that bit. Other comments or questions?
That's it for now.
That's it for now. Over here?
Just
I
one
suppose
question.
one should perhaps
Yeah.
ask, have they,
Ladies first, man.
I didn't speak loud enough. I only saw overhead lines kind of coming across the existing part here. Is this all going to be underground?
Yes.
Utilities? Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
I was just going to ask if they've read the memo from Robert Price dated July the 13th, 2017, and whether you've sort of had time to study that and want to come back to us as well. You'll need to answer some of the questions that are in that.
Right, we haven't thoroughly gone through all those comments yet, we're still obviously
Still
feeling
working
out
on
the
it.
board.
But
and
you've got a
working through
copy of it. It's been
But
shared.
you've got it.
Yes.
Okay. So you've asked for some waivers. Tell me about what you want waived and what the justification is for them.
One was the sidewalk waiver, and part of the justification for that is, in the past, we've seen dead-end subdivisions like this, small communities where there's not a lot of traffic. It's basically just the folks that live there. We've seen similar ones where there were sidewalks provided, and most of the folks just used the roadway anyway, because there isn't really any hazard for them to walk on the roadway because the traffic is so light. It creates another maintenance issue with keeping the sidewalks cleared, and there's really no way or location for them to basically, once they get down the sidewalks, they can walk around the neighborhood, but it doesn't go anywhere. There's no sidewalks down on Amherst Street. Thank you.
Today.
Okay.
Can I comment, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
I take your point, but if, as I would understand, cluster homes tend to be for lower income people and possibly people with young children. They are going to walk or want to or need to walk their children to the end of Amherst Road for school buses and that sort of thing. I have to say I disagree fundamentally with you.
I agree with Alistair, your comment with respect to there being a reasonable chance that you have some families with kids, but not necessarily that clusters are tied into being low income or
All right,
small.
point taken, but
But they're definitely family-friendly housing. Other comments?
I agree with you and Alistair on the issue of sidewalk.
Anyone else?
Our regulations still call for sidewalks in cluster subdivisions, and we haven't changed it, so I would be inclined to hold to it. It's been consistent across all the subdivisions we've done that I can remember since I've been on the board.
If the board, if we're definitely looking at a sidewalk provision, would the board entertain just doing a sidewalk on one side rather than the other side?
That's
Or
been
both
something we've
sides?
consistently been willing to look at and do just one side. So I think that probably yes, although what I'd like to do is kind of have everybody have a chance to comment on the prospects of the sidewalk waiver, but I don't want to actually vote on it until we've had a chance to open it up for the public and do the public hearing bit, hear from them, so that we don't make a decision that cuts off something somebody might have offered some input on. So if there's no other discussion on the sidewalk waiver, tell me about what other waivers you'd like or have proposed.
I think on the roadway, we were looking.
Right, and in the cluster ordinance, it says the planning board has flexibility on the road parameters such as width and vertical curves and that's that type of thing. So what we propose, typically on a cluster, you want a smaller road footprint. So we're proposing, your standard is 24, we're asking for 22 feet wide. And then the same thing with some flexibility on some of the vertical curves, the vertical alignment as well. So.
Okay. My approach to that instinctively is to say, let's hear from DPW and the fire department, and if they don't have an objection to it, then I'm favorably inclined to look at it. But without hearing from them to know whether it would be a problem for plows and fire trucks or if there's some reason to go in a different direction, I wouldn't be ready tonight to make that kind of a decision. That's my own 2 cents. I don't know if others have thoughts.
Could I echo that, Mr. Chairman?
But again, the difference between 22 and 24 isn't a mountain. I think that you may have something that would work.
I mean, really, a cluster, ideally you'd want to go down to like 18 feet, but.
I get the concept if it was something that was going to be privately maintained, but when you're going to turn it over to make it a town road and the town's got to deal with it with its own equipment,
sure. Point taken.
There's some necessary to be standardized. There's some necessity to standardize it so that it works for what they're doing. And as you narrow the road and you got to dodge mailboxes with the plow and all of those kinds of things, that makes it tougher and tougher.
Okay.
And I think the only other waiver was a request to the scale on the profile. I believe it was requested a vertical scale of 5 inches to the 5 feet to the inch. And in order to keep it on one page, we were looking to have 10 feet to the inch on that vertical scale.
Right. The 5 feet to the inch is good if it was like a 1% road, but this is an 8% road, so you don't really need that exaggeration on this road gradient.
In terms of what it shows on the plan, that's something that would be entirely landing upon CLD as the peer reviewer to decide whether they see and can have enough information to make a decision. If we've got their comments back, I assume that we could know whether that was something they picked up on.
We haven't had a chance to fully review their comments yet.
Okay.
So, but
I mean, they identified that it didn't meet the regulations, so.
That's all they did was say it doesn't meet the
Yeah.
regulations, but they didn't say we couldn't do our analysis
Right.
because of it or something like that. Okay. That's the only reason that I would be careful about that kind of a waiver, is to make sure that our peer review engineers can see what they need to see, and they may well be able to. They're smart folks. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other comments or discussions before we have a public hearing? All right. Let's open the floor up for any abutters or interested citizens who wish to weigh in. And gentlemen, can you yield the table so that the folks can have it? If they're coming, I don't know. Are there any abutters or citizens who wish to weigh in? If not, there is a correspondence that the board has received, which I can summarize because it's a little lengthy, but a copy of it will be in part of the file and incorporated and distributed to all members of the board. This is a letter that is prepared by Dan Ricker, who lives at 12 Merrill Road in Merrimack. He says he's an abutter to the parcel and goes through the citation for where it's located in the Aquifer Conservation District, tax map, and all of that. He's unavailable to be here tonight, has commented on a number of items which I will summarize for the benefit of the discussion. The first item is some question by Mr. Ricker about the water use approval and the question about the map datum and why we were incomplete in June and now we're suddenly finally complete as a result of that. And how you were able to achieve your approval from the Merrimack Village District with respect to there being a water supply. The second item, on July 1st, there's a communication. Again, this is just dealing with the map datum again. And it goes into what the board should consider and rely on in terms of the information about map datums and how that affects things. Part B of number 2 deals with some questions about water pressure and what's available and should the homeowners know that. And those kinds of things are necessarily significant to MVD's review. I don't know that they're within the planning board's purview. Item number 3 is sort of questioning whether any of the folks involved in the project, along with number 4, either in decisions at the MVD or with the zoning board or anywhere else, had conflicts of interest, and those things are described here and laid out, and I will leave it for all of those individuals to absorb and decide whether they have a conflict and make that choice. Now, item 5 on the list is the product stems from water usage and getting water to the homes, and asks us to consider the fact that Merrimack has some limited water resources and has had some challenges in the past, PFOA, wells offline, and that sort of thing. And how do we make a decision with respect to this subdivision in the context or in the background of there being some water limitations? Item 6 on this deals with the 6% slope and how that may impact the development and the layout of the land. And 6B deals with encouraging us to consider adopting low-impact development requirements of stormwater management into the subdivision regulations, which I think is something that isn't necessarily part of our regulations, but is part of our discussion in quite a few areas around here. And that is the conclusion of the itemized items in the letter. It concludes with, I request that you please take into consideration the points of the letter when making the decision on the Land of Goshen Watkins Road Development Project. Without saying it, I think that it's fair to say that the overall summary of Mr. Ricker's letter is that he opposes the planning board's review. You gonna have it? I thought that everybody had one of those. You have a
I've
copy
got
too?
one. Do you want a copy?
Yeah, let's pass them around so everybody gets a chance.
Oh, sorry,
and
I
then
thought everybody had
let's
it.
get them distributed by email so everybody's got one. No, it must have been a more recent correspondence that landed.
Please.
All right, so one's going that way, one's going that way. But between now and whenever we take up the thing for final action, everybody can have a copy and read it and absorb it. So the public hearing is still open, and that letter was offered up as public testimony. Are there others who wish to weigh in? Ma'am, please. 1 second.
If I remember, I sign in, right?
Yes, you do.
And then introduce myself.
Yes.
Oops. So my name is Heather Dubois. I'm right at the entrance of Watkins Road.
To the north of it or to the south of it?
Right over here.
West.
Number 40.
Yeah.
Number 40
South.
Amherst Road. So when you're weighing in on this cluster development, something I hear you talking about is like I hear them talking about whether they're going to do a sidewalk on one side or both sides, and we hear about like a turnaround, how the size of the road and how that's going to be. I hear you guys suggest talking to DPW and getting input from them. We recently had a culvert closed down on Amherst Road, so it's been a very quiet neighborhood for me. It opened back up. So when I hear people talking about what that looks like for a family, I'm a new mom of a toddler that's going to be right here and considering a new development going in there. Merrill Drive came in, and they do have a sidewalk, and I will say a lot of people appreciate going down these side streets because Amherst Road is so crazy busy. So some of the stuff I wonder about whether anyone considers that when you're going to put another development of a number of homes going in. in a very populated, very traffic-induced area of town that's not very far off. So I know we can't stop, development from happening, but when we look at so many, cluster concept that you're putting a lot into this small congested area, I just wonder if you consider town input, if you guys aren't living there, but you study what, whether it makes more sense to do your typical residential homes going into there because it, adds less congestion into an area, factors in the safety of people in the neighborhood, things like that. So I don't know who evaluates that or considers that, but.
It's a fair question. And I wish it had an easy answer. It's going to be a little complicated. I'll do my best. So you asked about a whole lot of different things. The difference between a conventional subdivision and a cluster subdivision here is worthwhile to talk about and to explain. If they did a conventional subdivision, all it would mean is that they would do bigger lots and use up the whole lot. And they'd have the same number of houses. It would just be a longer road and more spread out. And rather than do that, they cluster them all up into one area and leave a bunch of open space. And so cluster subdivisions are usually viewed and thought of as being less environmentally impactful, a little more desirable for preserving open space, because that open space will be preserved forever in conservation, and it will never, ever be able to be proposed to be doing anything with. Although most of it's wetlands anyway, which probably couldn't get built on no matter what the limitations were.
Right.
So in this case, they've gotten a variance to allow a cluster subdivision here, because normally to build a cluster subdivision, you have to have town water and sewer. They only have town water, not town sewer. They brought that before the zoning board and they received their variance. So that bit of the question is beyond us. They now have the right to do a cluster subdivision here, and the planning board's role is to see how we apply our regulations to talk about the things we've been talking about tonight. Forested setbacks, how wide is the road, what's the layout, is it sloped right, are we going to waive the sidewalk or not? And so that's what we're able to take a look at. The question of do we listen to town opinions, I can tell you absolutely so. Now, that doesn't always mean that I'll agree with everything that I hear or vote the way that people think that it ought to go. And sometimes there's some limitations where someone will say, hey, I just think that, not this is a residential, but somebody will say, hey, I think this is a terrible place to build a Burger King. Well, all right, but I don't have anything in the regulation that allows me to get at that question. And so people would like us to vote no based on, I think that this is a terrible place to build this. But that's not always within the regulations to do. People have the right to use their properties. So where we're really able to listen the most to town input is when someone is dealing with a specific bit of our regulation where they say, hey, regulation 308.5 says they need a sidewalk. Yeah. I think you should make them build a sidewalk. Or 308, whatever the number, I don't know what the numbers are, say that you need to build the roads so that the driveways slope towards the road and not the other way around. So we think you ought to make them do that, or whatever the regulation is. And those kinds of things, I think the board really has within our wheelhouse to do something about or do something with. I think that the cars are going to come out and point their headlights at my driveway, or those kinds of things we can kind of get at. Some of the things that people want us to take up and consider, we don't necessarily have within our regulations or our statutory authority to consider. So sometimes there's some frustration with this board and any other that makes those kinds of decisions. But we absolutely listen. And the one other thing that I wanted to kind of get you to elaborate a little bit more on your comment, because although you talked about a busy road and adding things to it and adding traffic, you also made a bit of a statement about side roads and sidewalks and how desirable those are, which almost sounds in favor or a favorable view of having, a 1,000-foot long road here with some sidewalk by it that you could have a refuge if you wanted to go for a jog or a walk or something like that and get off of Amherst Road. So did I understand you correctly, at least in terms of at least that bit being okay and favorable?
Yeah, I am in favorable of that, definitely, when you're going to look at some of those regulations to follow. I also, I was just thinking, I lost my thought now that I was talking in response to that. I guess looking at regulations, so when you talk about the road, entering onto Amherst Road versus a side, so I don't know what that looks like in dimensions. Does the road get narrower? Because Amherst Road at that corner is like one big flying and people turn around. So what that's gonna look like for what that size is, are we looking at that 22, 24 when we were talking about, and he said as low as 18? Is that actually gonna be how Amherst Road enters that, you know? That,
Sure.
That is a question.
So
that
there's
I
definitely
asked.
some regulations on that, and I don't know them by rote. And if they're getting a waiver from us on the width of the road so that it's 18 or 20 or 22 feet instead of 24 feet. Normally, the roads, the angle with which two roads meet is regulated, and there has to be the right geometry. There has to be the right sight distances in both directions up Amherst Road so that you can see far enough for the car and the traffic and the speed that they go. And I would guess that in this dynamic, it's probably requiring something like 400 feet of sight distance in both directions.
Okay.
And so they've got a design to meet that regulation. What we do as a planning board, because we're not necessarily engineering experts like them, although most of us are engineers, we rely on our peer review engineering company, which is CLD. They work for us,
Okay.
and they review their application, and they tell us where these guys have failed to meet something. And you've heard about some of that tonight, where CLD has pointed out that they have done the road profiles on a different scale than the regulation requires. So CLD is working for us to help us spot those things.
Okay.
One of them that is never overlooked is road geometry, though, and making sure that they align right.
Okay.
Normally, where a 24-foot road and another road meet, it's going to have that full width plus some radius aprons kind of at the end to fan out. You might remember not that long ago, the end of Wilson Hill Road was kind of reconfigured to narrow that down because it had this monster apron.
Right,
Then
right.
that doesn't meet the regulations. So
Okay.
there's size requirements for them
Okay.
that have to be laid out to make sense so that you have the sight distances, you have the traffic turning. There's also a regulation that controls whether the two roads meet at a slope or an incline so that you know where water and ice is going to go. There's a whole bunch of things that they look at to make sure that that works. Those kinds of things that work from a physical standpoint and a town standpoint may not be the kinds of things that you're thinking of in terms of what I want my kids, you know, what I want in my backyard, because you're right there. It's basically going to be not that far off the corner of your house.
Well, I
so-
wonder what that access point, it's weird. I don't know if any of you drove over there, but it's just a big, and when they plow it.
We have, and that's what Alistair was talking about, where how difficult it is to compare what you see when you go out there to what's on this plan, and that's why we kind of, we're asking the applicant to do a bit better job of drawing out what's there.
Yeah.
So
How
we
that
can
gets
see it.
handled by the town would be interesting.
One other thing that's also a possibility, and it's up to the board to decide whether it's the will of the board to go do that, but we do occasionally go out and look at a site physically and just kind of meet there on a Saturday morning and go take a walk around. And I don't know whether it'll be the will of the board to want to go do that on this site or not, but if that happens, that will be something that's decided here tonight to go do, and then it's public. The public can come and walk it with us. The other thing to mention is that this open space that could be a part of this subdivision, if it ultimately gets built and approved, is not just for the residents there, that's the public. So if that has any value to your interest in you to be able to go walk in the woods off of that property, that's available.
Can I also inquire, I don't know if you guys understood this more, but they talked about temporarily doing something with this pond, from what I understand, to build a bridge, I believe, for development of
Okay,
the
your
land.
microphone's a little far from you. I keep
Sorry.
getting notice that they're not sure whether you're on it or not. I can hear you fine.
I was asking about, I think they spoke of a temporary bridge that is going to be built. I believe that I overheard them speak up to do development or something. Can any of you speak to any of that, or?
I think I'll have to ask them to comment on it further, because I remember hearing something, but I'll get it wrong if I try to repeat it. So let's have the applicant,
Okay.
when the public comment period's over, they'll come and respond to whatever they've heard of the.
So I inquire about that only because of knowledge of quite the wildlife section over there that we have. I guess it's a man-made pond, so right, they could easily do away with it too. Is that what I understand?
I don't think necessarily you can just do away with it, but it does have a different treatment
Falls under-
from a regulatory standpoint than a natural pond.
Okay.
So,
All right. Thank you.
thank you. Captain Manueli?
John Manueli, Fire Marshal of the Town of Merrimack. I just want to bring up some of the concerns that we had on this plan from the fire department standpoint. As the board has already mentioned, the cul-de-sac being the primary. The cul-de-sac as designed will not support a fire apparatus. We use a template that mimics the school bus size, and I cannot get the template to operate correctly in that cul-de-sac. It's just too narrow. In point of fact, our fire apparatus, the biggest truck we have is the ladder truck. It's 46 feet long, and I can't imagine a 46-foot long fire truck fitting into a 50-foot diameter circle. It's just not going to work. So that will have to be enlarged in order for us to fit the apparatus. Even the approach angles into it won't allow the apparatus to go into or out of it. The other comment was just noticed tonight where they want to reduce the road width to 22 feet, and we're not in favor of that. This is a cluster development. There are a lot of houses close together. We need the width of the road to operate apparatus in the event of a fire. When the ladder truck is set up, the outriggers are set up, it's blocking over half of the road. When you factor in, 2.5, 3 foot high, rock hard snowbanks, you've eliminated any opportunity we have to expand into that area. So we really would look not in favor of narrowing that road down from 24 feet.
Okay. When you look at cul-de-sacs, your testimony makes perfect sense. Do you have a sense of what you normally do require, or do you simply ask the applicant to?
Basically, we can't design it, and we're loath to start doing that. What we do is we look at their design, and we base it on the approach angle coming in and the diameter with the templates that we use, which is standardized templates.
Okay.
We use what's called an SAU template, which is very readily available. I'm sure you guys are familiar with it. And we base it on that. And like I said, based on this, it's just not going to fit.
Thank you for the testimony tonight, and I'll let the board ask questions of you if you want. But one thing I want to make sure of, and I think it's fortuitous that you were here tonight, but I don't want that to be a substitute for whatever feedback you normally provide through the channels, so that we've got the record the way that it's supposed to be.
Absolutely.
So any other members of the board wish to ask any questions of our?
I would just have one suggestion for the captain, and that is, it sounds like our regulations aren't specific enough on the size of the cul-de-sacs, and maybe we'd ought to make some amendments there, and we would welcome any input you could give us. You cited an SAU
Template, yes.
template, which I'm not familiar with, but perhaps it would be helpful to all to put that in our regulations.
I believe the regulations probably are from an earlier time when fire apparatus was smaller, because there are quite a few developments in town that we do have a hard time operating in, Ravencroft,
Well, we
that type of
welcome
thing.
a recommendation for improvement in that
Okay.
area. That's all I wanted to say.
Very good.
I agree. Thank you. Any other members of the board? Thank you so much for being here and offering
Thank you.
comments. Any other members of the public or the wish to weigh in and offer the board anything to consider on any information heard tonight? If there's none, then we'll close the public hearing, and let me invite the applicants back up. I think we'll have some questions, and you'll have an opportunity to respond to whatever you've heard from the public testimony. I also want to make sure that this letter that came in is provided to you too, so that any issues that you think warrant some response, you could respond to.
Thank you. And just responding to the abutter's question as far as a bridge, there is no type of bridge. I think what she maybe misheard, but there is an area here which is the outlet structure to the existing pond, which is going to get raised up a little bit. Right now there's a footpath around it. As part of that improvement, that footpath is going to be a little bit wider, so you're going to have a safer pathway around there. So if folks do want to come and walk, through this open space, you're going to have, a safer, wider path.
A little bit better
there.
place to do it in.
Right.
Okay.
And the only other thing which I mentioned briefly, I kind of skipped over a little bit, is as far as the end of this pond, there is where this proposed roadway clips the edge of this pond. So there is some impact to the size of the pond right there. But that's it, as far as there's no other type of bridge construction or access ways required.
Do you need dredge and fill for that permit? State?
That's a good question. My first impulse is to say no. As part of, there's a regulation in the law, basically, whereas man-made structures in order to maintain their usefulness and utilization, are allowed to be, for example, fire ponds are allowed to be dredged. It has to be certified, bona fide fire ponds. But that's something that we'll certainly look into. There's a lot of exemptions for that, man-made structures. If it's required, we'll certainly access that.
Okay. I would think because we won't know how to make that decision about what's required or not, or what's allowed to be an exemption or not. If it turns out that you feel like you don't need a permit, I think we'd have to figure out what we require as evidence of that. Do we require a letter of DES that says no permits required, or an opinion of legal counsel or somebody to sort of tell us that, because we don't have a way of judging that or basing that. So.
Right. If we were to go that way, we would certainly support, that position and verify with DES that was, and obtain a letter from DES that they concur.
Yeah, and that's probably the least expensive way to do it. But certainly a letter from DES saying that doing this doesn't require a permit from us is all the evidence I would need to be convinced. I would be satisfied with that. As to that bit of it. How long is your roadway going to be to the end of the cul-de-sac?
It's just under 1,200 linear feet.
Okay, so you're right at the edge of the maximum length for a roadway.
It's like
without-
1150, something like that effect.
Okay.
If I could speak to the cul-de-sac dimensions, it's right out of your regulations. It's clearly spelled out in the regulations what size the diameter needs to be. The pavement edge and the right-of-way radius is all in there, and it's all per your regulations. And as far as the landscape island, it says that that's an option as well. So we just took it out of the regulations. We can certainly make it bigger if it's a concern.
Yeah.
But
So there's regulations work that way. So we've got some prescription in the regulations, which may be something that's been in there for quite a long time. But we've also got in the regulation the opportunity to take in the input from DPW and the fire department. And as a planning board, if we hear from them that this won't work for them, I'm sure we could ignore their advice and give you approval anyway. But I don't think that you'll find too many votes that are willing to do that. So
either way, I mean, we have a set of regulations that we designed by, and that's what we did. If you want something bigger, if the regulations haven't been updated accordingly, or whatever the concerns are. And as well, we can also run the SU template that he had mentioned around there as well. So
I understand the frustration, and I've felt it myself being on the other side of the table. When you've got a regulation that says 50 feet is enough, then you ought to be able to rely on that. In this case, you've got a second regulation that's working at the same time, which says that the DPW and the fire department gets to weigh in and offer the board some opinion and advice on the roads.
Sure.
And then we can weigh in on that. And Nelson's advice about correcting the regulation so that it doesn't have that kind of a dynamic in it is well taken by me. That's not fair to applicants to give you a number and then say, well, yeah, but that's still not good enough.
sure.
So I'm not.
I thought it was small when I looked at it. So, but that's what we.
So I would love to be able to say, 50 has to become 70 or 100 or give you something definitive. I got to let you fall back on whatever that template is and use it, because it may be that it's some, odd number of feet that is satisfactory and it's
Sure.
not an even number. Any other comments on any of the other feedback that we heard from in the letter or otherwise? So I think that I understand this situation about the map datum and why we were not ready to go last month, but ready to go this month. And although I understand it, I would love to have a record of it. And what I understand is that it was simply a technical glitch where map datums, which is sort of the reference point for a set of elevations, happened to not coincide, and then because they didn't coincide, it created a false result when the analysis was done. And when you get the map datums right, there's nothing wrong with the development. It would have met the standard. Is that correct?
That's 100% correct. Yes, the topography that was provided was not on the same datum, so let's assume we just went out and made a topographic map and assumed that our starting point was 0. Everything would be from 0 to 20 or something, whereas instead of being on a USGS datum, so there's a known datum that MVD is using, so they know they have an elevation on their water tower that says, let's just call it 100 feet. And if our datum is different from that, and we're saying that we're at 500 feet, but it's really not 500 feet, it's an assumed datum. So it's really just a numbers thing where you can adjust that datum by adding and subtracting to get onto that datum.
Okay. I think that that's important to explain for the record because, at least in the letter that was written, there's quite a bit of concern expressed about, it looks like a bit of sleight of hand with, things don't work, but all of a sudden they do work. So if you understand that the datum thing is simply an engineering exercise, a math problem, and not a characterization of what's going on the land.
Right. Frequently, there's a lot of surveying is done on an assumed datum. So on a local scale where everything is accurate to itself, but not necessarily tied to USGS datum. There's an additional level of work to get to that point, so you have to bring in those control points from the benchmarks and USGS. So there's additional work, and a lot of times that's done as another step where you get the work completed, and then you follow through and adjust it to that datum. So that step just didn't get made at the proper time.
Okay. Any other comments with things that you've heard? Any questions by members of the board based on the public testimony and the things that we've heard?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to clarify. I've read section 412C, which refers to the details of the cul-de-sac, and I think you're not quite on the same page as these, but the point you make anyway is the fire department will say yay or nay, and we generally don't overrule the fire department.
I think that that's fair. With respect to your waivers, I think that you've heard at least a couple of folks at the board prefer to see a sidewalk built. We could certainly take up a vote on your waiver if you want, but maybe you've heard enough already and decide that building a sidewalk on one side of the road would be a way to go. Your waiver that talks about the road profile and the scale of it, I think is something that I would put off to hear from CLD whether they've got any issue or problem with it. And then the third waiver that you asked for, what was it?
The scale of the
Scale.
vertical scale.
The scale, the vertical scale was something I want to hear from CLD on, but you had one before that.
Road width.
Oh, road width. I think you've heard from the fire department that they don't support it. I think the board could go through the exercise of voting if you choose to. I know that I'm inclined to follow the fire department's recommendations on that. It makes a lot of sense when you think about the possibility of snowbanks, the possibility of a very large fire truck with its outriggers out could keep a 18 or 20-foot road where there's no room for the other car to go past the fire or police cars or other trucks or things that need to get through. So that does make a lot of sense. I do get what you're saying about cluster subdivisions are usually built compact, but at least in regard to having fire safety, I think we got to get that right. So, but if you'd like us to take up a vote on
I don't think that's necessary. I think with the sidewalk waiver, I believe it requires that there's a sidewalk on each side, so perhaps the waiver or the board could vote on allowing just one side rather than two.
Sure. What's the will of the board with respect to waiving sidewalks along one side of the road and having them built on the other? Will someone make that motion?
So moved.
Can you tie it to one of the statutory criteria referenced in the staff's memo? It's probably about the middle of the page there.
Point of clarification, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
If we vote to put it on one side, it should go all the way to Amherst Road.
I agree.
From the cul-de-sac to Amherst Road. Just wanted to be clear.
Okay.
Okay?
That makes sense to me.
This doesn't help me at all.
Oh, sorry, so you pick a strict conformity or specific
Oh, I gotta pick one.
circumstances? Sorry. Eeny meeny.
Eeny meeny?
Yeah, specific circumstances, I think, in this
Yeah,
one.
specific circumstance, you got the water. Just read it. One side.
Okay, so I move that we waive
The sidewalk requirement.
the
for one
sidewalk
side.
requirement for both sides of the cul-de-sac. A strict conformity would pose an unnecessary hardship to the applicant, and a waiver would not be contrary to the spirit and the intent of the regulation.
Noting that they'll build it on one side.
Knowing that they'll build on one side as opposed to the
Okay,
other.
perfect. Is there a second for Bill's motion? Second by Alistair. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 7-0-0. So that clears up that bit of business for you. I think some of the things that we've got left undone that I'd like to see done in order to get to a final approval is having the staff get time to go through CLD's comments and digest those, make sure that you guys have a chance to accommodate those. See if we can get some of the changes to the plans that we've talked about, where we've got existing conditions shown, and some of the other things with the house footprints and the septic footprints shown. I think that you probably will have to make some changes to the plan to accommodate the road if we're going to rearrange the cul-de-sac a little bit. See what you can do with those houses on that 100-foot buffer, and see. Ultimately, the barn bit in the buffer is not on our plate to decide. That's for the zoning board to decide. So we've got a handful of things to accomplish. I want to make sure that we've discussed all of them so you know what we have to do between now and the next time, but I'm anticipating that the board would prefer to table it to allow those things to occur and then take up the final decision once all those answers are in hand. But I want to make sure that we haven't not mentioned something that needs to happen between now and then so that you get a fair chance at them all. Desiree?
Snow storage, if you guys can indicate that on your plans, the area that you're proposing, that it would be stored, because you'd mentioned it in notes in the plans.
Okay, that's an interesting one, because as a town road, the town will be dealing with the snow deposits and storage, if it becomes a town road.
Well, then there's a note on the plan that mentions snow storage, so maybe if it's a town road, it doesn't need the note.
It probably wouldn't need the note in there, as long as the town is approving it and thinks that they've got places to push the snow, which will affect your cul-de-sac layout, because that's where the snow can't be gotten rid of the most. So it doesn't require a note on the plan, but it does require you to make sure that DPW has figured that out and that they know what they'll do with it when they come down the road. If your roadway is going to be proximate to the pond, the man-made pond, I don't know whether they'll want you to have a guardrail or something on that. Just deal with them on that.
I think we need clarity on the ownership of the open space as to how that's going to be handled.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that you've answered at least some of that, but
yeah,
understanding that it's going to be a homeowners association and how that'll be
whether
done.
Or not there's going to be a conservation easement.
Yeah.
I think that's,
or who's going to hold the conservation easement?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
be there. Understanding that access easement to the property to the north and what's going on with it, and permission to move and what it's for, and whether it's got any dimensions that exist, or the possibility that somebody would try to make a road out of that. I don't know if CLD's comments dealt with the geometry of the road intersection with Amherst, but it looks to me to be at a bit of an angle that we've not in the past been particularly fond of accommodating. But I guess it's already there, isn't it?
Except, Mr. Chairman, if you read the notes from Robert Price, the DPW did make the comment about radiuses that would have to be established.
Oh, it flared at the end?
It's in the Robert Price's memo that DPW had made the comment about radiuses.
Yeah. I think because it's going to be paved for the first time, there'd have to be aprons on the pavement as radiuses. I think as a paper road, its sight distances and angle of attack on Amherst Road may be already decided, unfortunately. But we'll have to look into that and see, know more about it. Other comments, questions? Is there anything else that we think the applicant ought to deal? Jillian, is there anything that you might have taken note of that we talked about tonight that the applicant should attend to between now and then?
I think you've covered them. I've been making a lot of notes.
Okay.
We got the issue with the leach field separate from the house.
The table for the open space calculation.
Yeah.
Anything else? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, failing that, then
Slope
may I make a motion that we... Oh, sorry, Nelson.
Slope of the driveways is just...
Slope of the driveways, yes, on a map.
May I make a motion that we table this matter for them to prepare the information we want, and we will reconsider this matter in 1 month's time, if that's acceptable to the applicant?
So I think before we take a second for that motion, I think instead of table, it's continue.
Oh, sorry, continue the matter
And it's to August
15th.
15th. Is our first meeting in August?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, the second meeting in August. Your first
Second.
meeting's August 1. And I don't think you'd want to have it done for August 1. No, I didn't think so. I make a motion that we continue this matter there till August the 15th at 7 p.m. in this room with no further notice to abutters.
Is there a second? Second by Mr. Boyd. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 7-0-0. Thank you for your presentation. I know
Thank
that
you.
there's a lot to this that we're asking you a lot of questions about. You're doing a good job of working your way through, and I know that it's much more desirable to have it fly through and everybody just say, this sounds great, and let's vote for it. But the world doesn't always work that way.
They're very thorough and conscientious questions, so I don't mind those. We want to get it right, too.
Thank you. Okay. Item 4 on our agenda is Brett W. Vaughn as the applicant and Brett W. Vaughn Revocable Trust as the owner. Review for acceptance and consideration of final approval of a 13-lot residential subdivision. The parcel is located at 123 Wilson Hill Road in the R1 Residential District, Tax Map 4A, Lot 23. Jillian, is there anything that we need to know before we hear from the applicant?
Yes, the applicant has been before you on several occasions in a conceptual nature for this subdivision. Tonight, they're before you for final approval. I did include the last staff memo and meeting minutes from the last time they were here a year ago, June 2016. We have not received CLD comments back yet, nor a majority of the review comments from the town departments. Some of the items that you may wish to discuss include proposed driveway locations, the variance that was previously obtained for lot frontage and area, and they also have a couple waiver requests that you would want to discuss tonight.
Thank you, Jillian. And thank you. Please introduce yourself again for the record and then tell us where we are.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Chris Gaida. I am a soil and wetland scientist with Fieldstone Land Consultants, and I'm here with Mr. Vaughn and also Nate Chamberlain in support. So part of this subdivision, I know Mr. Vaughn has been working extensively with abutters in this area as far as road width, length, number of the lots, buffers to these properties as well. So some of this configuration has to do with input from his abutters and talking with them. If anything looks a little bit strange to you, some of that may have to do with that. This is a conventional subdivision. There's been some modifications to the initial waiver. With this lot, basically, there was Mr. Vaughn was able to purchase this other property and has subdivided that previously, so that changed that request for a substandard size on that lot, which was granted.
I'm sorry, a waiver was granted?
It was a zone.
Variance, okay, yeah, because
I'm sorry.
if tonight's our first chance at an actual submission, we didn't waive anything yet.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So these are conventional lots. Basically, we did a number of test pits up here. It's all a well-drained soils. They're all full-size lots. Some of this roadway has been, again, we're kind of, one of the waivers we're requesting is perhaps allowing for a change in the slope here on this driveway to minimize some of the cuts that are required and soil impact up next to the abutters. So this one,
excuse me, so the test pits are shown here. I want to stick with the one sheet one, but it doesn't show everything I want to see on it.
Okay. So which page are you flipping to so we can
I'm
follow
gonna-
you?
I'm going to start with this one and work up the hill. So page number 4, which
Okay.
has the topography on it, as well as the test pits. So all these test pits are shown with the 4K areas that meet the requirements, the proposed well locations, the existing conditions with the topography, stone walls, the existing driveway here that goes up to Mr. Vaughn's home in the upper portion here. This comes up and ends in a cul-de-sac here. One of the other waivers, or excuse me, variances that was requested was a reduced frontage variance here. So that was granted, and the only change that I believe we got a note from was that we needed to go back to the zoning board as far as a procedural thing. It referenced 12 lots. Being able to change the configuration of this lot, it allowed us to gain 2 more lots. So essentially, there's no change in the variances granted, other than we no longer need the variance granted for the substandard lot here. Is that correct?
My understanding was that some of the variances were very specific in terms of saying that the lot had X frontage, whereas Y is required, and that some of those dimensions have changed.
On that particular variance, these are the same. So at the cul-de-sac was where the reduced frontage was, is my understanding, and the other one was on that first lot here, down below. So this is now a compliant lot and it's not substandard anymore.
So I hate to jump right back on the same subject again, but what's the dimensions of your cul-de-sac on this one?
It looks too small.
Too small?
You know the answer.
It looks too small to me.
Same problem.
What did he say?
How big's your cul-de-sac? It's too small again.
Town spec, so it's the same size.
Follow the same rule again.
So we'll jump right to that.
Okay.
But, excuse me, Brett Vaughn, the applicant, while we're still on I noticed on the letter from the town, it mentioned that we would have to go back to zoning because of the difference in the number of lots. So you were asking that, when we asked for the 3 on the front, on the cul-de-sac, and were granted, and then the plan that we had been here in front of you before met the road frontage, but it had a real bizarre cut because we didn't own that piece of land. So we were granted for the cul-de-sac, and then that bottom lot, we just don't need to use it because we've got a lot better configuration now. So when I read there that it suggested that we go back in front of the zoning board again because there's a different number of lots on the road, my question is that really the case? Because I think it's irrelevant. We were asking for road frontage on the cul-de-sac.
Yep.
And the cul-de-sac's identical. It'll actually be bigger when you get done with this tonight, and so those will be a little bigger.
So I'm not sure you'll love the answer to the question.
I still got to go back.
No, I won't give you that answer, but it may mean the same thing. So the planning and zoning administrator makes the call about whether something complies with zoning or needs a variance, not the planning board. So once the planning and zoning administrator makes a determination, you can appeal that determination, but you appeal it to the zoning board too. So
Going to a meeting.
Go to a meeting.
All right.
But that said, I think that it's of such a minor nature. I couldn't imagine the zoning board giving you much of a difficulty on those bits of changes. And it would also give you a clean record that would protect you going forward, so that you know that you've got all your approvals. Perfect.
Can I just clarify that it's there's 2 lots with frontages that are different than what were specified in the original variances. So the original variance is very specific in the amount of feet of frontage that
On the cul-de-sac.
that they had and were granted, yeah.
On the cul-de-sac.
And they're different, yes.
They're going to be different again.
Yeah, they're going to be even more different when
Well,
you
they'll be
make the
different
cul-de-sac
again,
bigger.
yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I assumed that the engineers drew it the way that they asked for it.
But we're going to continue anyway.
Yeah, no, it's different, and it's not to do with the number of lots.
Oh,
That's, you know,
okay.
that's a technical, but it's the
Okay.
specificity of the frontage that's
Oh,
granted.
geez.
Okay, I'll verify that with Chad.
And it's going to change when you redesign
And
it.
it'll-
So,
yeah.
just to be clear, I think one of my colleagues was asking whether that would make it premature for the planning board to take this up. And so that's a choice that the planning board can make, whether it requires that you have the variances in hand ahead of time, or whether it feels like you would grant conditional final planning board approval contingent on getting those variances. And the planning board has usually been willing to do that in a situation where the justification for the variance seems readily apparent, but not always. The reason for doing it that way is that it puts the applicants, the one that bears the risk if the zoning board, if we give you conditional planning board approval based on you getting a variance, and you don't get a variance, your planning approval goes down.
That's correct.
Goes down with it. So it isn't a risk to us to do it in this order, but just so you know the ramification of doing it that way. That said, if we end up going through some of these questions and we want to see some changes to the plans anyway, and you end up coming back by August 15th for our next meeting, you may be able to catch the zoning board between now and then and get that done. Or maybe you'd rather, instead of August 15th, come September 15th, or whatever that date ends up being. And then you can go to the ZBA before time.
It's like
So-
next year, just like, yeah, sooner the better, but I appreciate that, yeah.
Yeah, understood. Just, I mean,
Thank you.
There's, some towns are very, very strict, and the planning board won't hear you until the zoning board does their business. We've not required that in most cases unless there's some real substantial doubt or confusion about the variance, or it's a very complicated project. So I think that answers the variance question.
Yep.
Planning and zoning administrator is the one that decides whether you either meet zoning or you need a variance. We don't, that decision is not appealed to us, it's appealed to the zoning board itself, who could either overrule that or grant the variance for you. So, and usually what you do when you go to them is you ask for alternatives and say, I want this or that, whichever one you think. So.
Thank you.
I didn't mean to sort of derail your whole presentation of the subdivision with let's jump to the cul-de-sac. Ultimately, we got to hear enough about what you've got on a plan to decide that it's complete and accepted for review. So let's sort of reframe things on that. Does that work?
Sure.
Chris?
So as far as the other requirements, obviously the topography, the wetlands here are shown, the 4K areas. We've done all the test pits, the wells. Again, these lots are large enough that we don't show any houses on here. Again, I don't. Being a conventional subdivision, I don't see any issues with placement on those, or that being an issue with any of the buffers or setbacks.
So the lot that your house is on, Brett, that kind of circles behind all those lots.
Yes, sir.
When it gets behind those lots, how wide is that area of what's going to be your lot, which is kind of a buffer? Up, down? Down.
This
All
area
the way around the other side of the thing.
A23.
Oh,
Yeah, right there, where Brett's pointing. How wide is that little strip?
that looks like about 50 feet.
Okay. Thank you.
And again, that was an issue with so the reason for that odd-shaped configuration is to allow, is my understanding, Brett, some buffer here to the abutters. So-
Yes, would you like me to
It also
talk
gives
about
you
that
frontage.
conversation?
Yeah, please.
And then, okay, so when, the last time we were in front of you, we were discussing water issues, and some abutters had several issues, and we were kind of at a standstill. And you had suggested that you can't ask me to do it, but you'd suggested that, you know, what you're proposing here looks reasonable. Maybe spend some time with the abutters and find out what you can do to change the plan so that maybe everybody would be more comfortable with it. So we did that. We had several meetings, and there was basically three things that concerned the abutters. The number of homes, the location of the homes, this has changed a little again because we added another one on the west side of the property. But when we changed from our original plan, we eliminated a home basically where A23 would be, where that shows my frontage for my lot.
Okay.
There would have been a, home in there. They wanted a guaranteed buffer, even though there's certainly setbacks and there's the topography, in my opinion, was going to make it very unrealistic for anybody to build anywhere near those homes. But they wanted a buffer. So
Makes it easy to give if it was land that couldn't be built on anyway.
So it kind of, that kind of worked nice. So the idea was we wrapped around, you see the A23 at the top, that wraps all the way around the property. And at one point, where the dotted line is there, we're proposing all that as a conservation easement.
Okay.
So there's the buffer and the conservation easement. The other issues that were brought up is, once again, I think that in my opinion, the engineering and the regulations.
Your
are in such a way-
microphone switched off or something.
My hands are moving too much.
There you go.
That the septic designs are appropriate, that there wouldn't be any issues with neighbors' wells, but on the three bottom ones, actually, you could see it from that other chart. Those 3 lots that would, be close to abutting the others there, that we would over-design the septic systems. We would add something so that people were comfortable that it's up and above standard. And then what's going to turn out to be a big one is the abutters had suggested that how could I guarantee that nobody on any of those lots would ever have to blast to put in a foundation or on the road. They just didn't want any blasting. So I agreed that we wouldn't do that. We'd either place them on the lot that they didn't need to, or we would use a hydraulic hammer to remove ledge where it needed to be. And anyway, we worked through it, and to the point where when we went to the zoning board for the variances, that we actually heard from the abutters as favorable. So they supported us in this new design. This is the design,
Okay.
the design they'd like. So.
Well, excellent. So that definitely helps out a lot. One of the things with, what did you call it, A23, the one that your house is on?
Yes.
That wraps around? Your, that bit of frontage, which is going to be on the right side of your road, is actually the only frontage your lot has on a town road, so.
Yes.
It's going to create some funny results with respect to what your address is going to be and where your mailbox is going to be. And maybe the fire department would want to know that you're on the left side of the road, even though you've got an odd numbered address, or however that plays out.
Okay. I hope that's the least of my problems there.
Yeah, it's certainly not a planning board problem. It's certainly not a-
Or I hope that's my worst problem. That's what I'm saying.
So how did you decide where to draw the line for the conservation easement? Because some of that land that's north of it, I guess that's north, where's the?
So it's a little arbitrary. It's in front of all the abutters, so that took care of the, it's like
Covered
there's
that issue, okay.
conservation. Highly unlikely, but my lot still has frontage on Greater Road.
Okay.
And it has the proper amount of footage so that it would be road frontage. It's not subdividable, it can't be done, but if someday somebody built something, it's all conservation land back there, I think now, but someday, if somebody did a 24-foot wide paved road through there, I think that there's some potential that someone could have another lot.
Okay.
So that's why I just left it there. If that's an issue, it's so arbitrary. I don't think that's ever
So
going to happen.
remote.
We could make it bigger.
I was just had the question. I don't have any reason to put pressure on you to make the conservation easement bigger. I think that you've satisfied what the goal was, which was to create a situation where the neighbors had some confidence in what was going to go on with their wells and their neighborhood and stuff like that. I agree with you that, I mean, first, to make that greater road access usable, it has to be upgraded from Class 6 to something else.
Oh, yeah.
And that happens when some private developer is interested in doing that bit of construction. And so, whether that ever happens.
Well, plus, it's a long way, too, because both sides of the road now, well, not both sides, but most of it is in conservation right now. I mean, someone have to go a long way before they got to the first house.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Somebody would have to build a lot of road.
You got to build a long road just to get to where
okay.
they could start.
So your driveway is going to go across one of the new residential lots, and you've got protected an access easement for that.
Yes, and I would probably move that driveway a little more to the south. I mean, we just drew it the way it is for now to make it a little more comfortable for that lot.
Hug that line a little closer so that lot gets the benefit of more use.
I would think that would make sense, yes.
So I don't think that it's an issue with the size lots that you have, but one of the things that I'd like to know is if wherever the driveway is going to be, how much of 4A 23-4 is on each side of the driveway, so that I'd know whether that person's got an acre on one side of your driveway that it could consider. And we don't necessarily have to understand that now. That's kind of.
I'm sorry. I see the lot. So you're asking what was the question?
So I assume that the house is on 4A 23-4 is going to be built on the upper right side of the driveway.
Yes.
How much area is that?
Exclusive of the easement?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's probably in one of these notes here.
Yeah, you're a little away from it.
I'm sorry about that. I don't know off the top of my head, but I suspect it's in one of these notes here to make sure that it meets the requirements. We'll definitely look at that and make sure that it does.
Okay. I don't know that there is a requirement. I'm just wanted to know. I'm just curious. I want to make sure that it's functional for that person that lives there.
Yeah, so the existing driveway here, so the easement's right here, and our test pit's, way up in here. This is a 100 scale plan, so the proposed leach field or house area is about 150 to 200 feet away from that driveway.
So I guess you don't really know until somebody wants to build on it, but will that owner create lawn on the other side of your driveway, or is that going to be just wooded and leave it alone? Or?
I just got through saying I'd move the driveway to the south, but as you can see, the grade's pretty steep right there. I'd probably have to come a third of that distance down and then move I've been looking at it, and I think I can still keep my 10% grade, and I don't know that anybody'd want to put anything over there.
Yeah, okay, I
It
got
could
you.
be a shared driveway? Would it be a shared driveway between you?
No.
No, you would have another curb cut then?
Well, that might make sense. I hadn't even thought of it. Maybe that would make some sense, is to have a shared driveway, so then he doesn't have to have another driveway cut.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure
Gives
everybody
him
would
more
like,
room.
and that
Yeah.
would give him more room for the house. I have no problem doing that. The only thing that I know at our house is my significant other wants that to be the last house lot sold.
So shall it be. I see on your plans you got a lot of rock walls dividing up your lot, and we don't have a particular regulation on them, but just a preference or favorable view of rock walls. So I hope that you preserve what you can of those existing rock walls.
Some of them are double wides, nice ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those, yeah. Some of them are not too nice.
Excellent.
Some of them are beat up pretty bad.
Is there anything else that you'd like to offer the board with respect to just getting to the decision of whether the application's complete?
The only other, not as far as complete.
Okay. So, does the board have any questions to answer that? Alistair?
No, I was about to make a motion.
Is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I make a motion. We consider this is ready for acceptance by the board tonight.
Is there a second for Alistair's motion to accept the application as complete? Second by Desiree. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 7-0-0 for completeness. Do you have any waivers in your proposal?
I believe so.
Julian will have told me, or Robert.
Another sidewalk.
Tim.
One was the sidewalk waiver that we were requesting. Again, it's a cul-de-sac road with obviously the only body going to be using this is these residents here. Wilson Hill Road is, as we know, is kind of narrow with no sidewalks down there. Basically, for the similar purposes, we were looking at not having a sidewalk along there.
Okay. There's some discussion in the staff's memo and also in a letter from Captain Manueli dealing with the length of your roadway and whether there's fire hydrants around and whether that complies with our maximum length of a dead-end roadway. So the staff is indicating in its memo that you're greater than 1,500 feet for your road length. Is that correct?
That would be the other waiver. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just flipping through here.
No, it's okay.
We're asking for a waiver for the road length, I know that.
Okay. So the issue, the reason that we have a regulation on road length is again related to fire and how far they can get down the road if they have to. We're already seeing a recommendation from the fire department that there be a requirement to install water cisterns to be available to their use if they ever had to get up there to put out a fire. Have you seen that letter, and do you have comments or thoughts about it, about that requirement?
I have not seen it. I know this is kind of in the early stages here. Did you,
Okay.
Nate, have you seen that at all?
I heard about it.
It's dated yesterday, so
yeah.
it wouldn't surprise me if
Yeah.
you haven't seen it yet.
Came in just recently. It was forwarded to Chad.
Chad got it, and he called me today and told me. And then I know that this process, we intend to have conversations with the fire department and more conversations.
Okay.
I know that I've had some, and I think there's, I guess I should be specific, that when we turned the plans over to the fire department, I spoke with John, and he had suggested that that the chief had suggested 2 cisterns. For a few reasons, I think that's extreme, but that's what the chief said, 2 cisterns. I don't think we have any other cisterns in town. I don't think there's any cisterns. Are there cisterns in town?
There have been some requirements of them, but there's also an alternative that we've worked out in the past that I'll offer up to you to consider and discuss with the fire department, see what they think. We had a subdivision that was approved to have a cistern, one 30,000-gallon cistern, and the question came up about fire sprinklers in the homes. And
John did
so,
bring that up. Yeah.
So there's a statute that says we can't require you to put in fire sprinklers, and neither can the fire department in new residential development. But it did satisfy the fire department as a replacement for a cistern if you were willing to voluntarily do it. Now, I can't speak for them and know whether they would continue that kind of an approach, but that's been a solution that was used once in the past. It made a lot of sense to me because fire sprinklers are way better, in my view, than a cistern.
And then there was, so that we had that discussion, so that's why I figured, I knew that the
Yep.
recommendation would come like this, and then we'd have discussion, and we'd talk more with John. I also had mentioned to John if the fire department would consider a fire pond on the property. And he asked that I get with the engineers and propose something that made sense.
So one of the things to think about, and I'm not going to sell you any more on sprinklers other than this one comment, cisterns or fire ponds require maintenance,
Right.
which they're saying you put into a homeowners association, which means you now have to have a homeowners association, which is a headache of its own, which will inevitably 10 years from now and 20 years from now lead to more headaches. Whereas sprinklers in everybody's home not only adds value to their home, and you don't have a homeowners association and all of that headache. So anyway, won't say any more. We're not allowed to require it. You don't have to have it.
I appreciate that. I hadn't thought of that concern. I'm sure that John and the fire chief, I still think we should go through the process of saying, hey, if a pond is 4 times the size of the cistern, and we could guarantee that there's going to be X number of gallons in it, and that you know, we could have a hydrant in the right spot.
That makes sense. I mean, go through the
And then
process
even if
as you
they
choose
do,
or
then I
as you
have
see
to
fit.
you're right, I should consider the rest of that too, that
Well, yeah.
probably would make it not doable.
All we want as a planning board is to have the fire department satisfied that they can respond to an emergency up there. However that's accomplished, I'll leave that between you and them. But have that conversation if you want to pursue a pond or a private fire hydrant or whatever. And my suggestion that sprinklers are somehow a substitute for cisterns is me talking out of school. I don't know that they'll agree to that, or they wouldn't, or otherwise. It's happened once in the past, and that's the only thing I can offer on that.
Okay.
So, but there is a recommendation now for the cisterns because of the length of the roadway. That's two recommendations, but it really kind of focuses on that same thing. You'll have that letter, and you'll have a chance to kind of meet with them and make them satisfied. But as a part of a final approval, we'd want to see that they're satisfied with that.
This probably falls onto that category as well, in working with the fire department and the DPW. Part of this roadway here as it comes up is fairly steep, and something we'd like the board to at least consider. There's a requirement, as I understand it, for within, is it 200 feet, that there'd be 5% slope. We'd like to consider whether or not we could request a waiver to basically increase that slope, perhaps 8%, a little bit closer to the intersection of Wilson Hill Road. And what that would allow is basically to minimize this cut here. So we're going to have less environmental impact and have a little bit steeper access here, but 8% is not really all that steep. It would just basically shift this slope towards the roadway a little bit, and it would allow us to minimize this impact here as far as the cut required.
So in the past, when something like that's been suggested, the one thing that was the decision maker or the criteria was that ultimately, if you're going to go steeper towards Wilson Hill Road, you go lower than Wilson Hill Road and end up coming as a rise to the road so that your water doesn't go into Wilson Hill Road. Mm-hmm. That there's an actual depression before you get there, and your final bit of approach to Wilson Hill Road is actually uphill.
Right, and I believe that there is already, and we wouldn't propose changing that. And Nate, you can correct me if you will, but really it's just shifting this 5% section down a little bit farther, so that instead of having 5% here, for the next 200 feet or whatever, maybe it's 6% or 7%. It would minimize this cutting here.
Okay, so that's what I've offered in terms of how that decision landed before the board in the past. Ultimately, I think DPW would weigh in on it and whether they thought there'd be any issue with cars approaching Wilson Hill Road and being able to stop if the road was icy or something on 5 or 8%. Maybe that's part of the regulations. But so the first step, I think, to getting a waiver on that is to have some feedback from the town departments that are going to matter.
That was a comment in their recent memo, so I think that's a discussion that you'll need to have with them if it's something they'd be willing to change, because it's already a comment they've made.
And so the dynamic that happens is they're making recommendations to us, which we will either adopt or decide not to adopt. And I think that we're more often adopting, although we haven't always agreed with them. So if you have them satisfied, then their recommendation is for approval. And if they're not satisfied, you're arguing with us to think your way instead of their way. But you still get the chance to come have that argument if you want to.
The way that the plans are drawn right now, Jillian, they do show the 2% grade for the proper distance, then 6 according to the road regulations, and for the full 250 feet or whatever it was, and then to 8. Correct?
The comment is, under section 4.12D, the proposed street should be laid out so as to intersect as nearly as possible to right angles. No street shall intersect at less than 60 degrees. The maximum grade on the approach leg should not exceed 5% for a distance of 200 feet. there's only 50 feet shown.
Okay, my mistake. I thought that Chad drew it according to the regulations, and we were going to discuss it going forward. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we do have, I don't know why they're missing this. We have the 200 feet right here at 5%. This is drawn for the regulations, but I mean, we'll certainly take a look at their comment and discuss it with them, but.
Maybe Chad already asked.
It could be just a misperception.
Maybe, you know, the argument there, I think, is that given that it is a 1,500-foot road with a cul-de-sac, that the regulations are maybe for a more extreme road. That's not the case. All right, we won't use that argument.
It could be for higher use, but really, ultimately, their satisfaction is going to be a big part of it.
Okay. Well,
These
it
comments
sounds
were
like they've
dated
already
April
weighed in.
12th by Don Tamula. Does that have an effect on when you?
Pardon me?
July 12th.
I
It says
think-
April 12th on the
I think
letter.
it's dated wrong because this
Okay.
just came in.
Oh.
I say it hasn't been submitted by April 12th. One thing I wanted to mention is we had the same issue with the profile scale here. So
Okay.
that'll be a waiver as well.
Okay. Is that it for covering some of not some, all of the waivers that you've talked about, or are there any others that you have in mind?
Yes, to the best of my knowledge.
I think that's it.
Okay. I think that I would do what we did last time, which is offer some get some public opinion before we vote on waivers, and see where they go. I think some of them involve us hearing back from town departments. The sidewalk waiver is probably one that the board can take up and consider and decide whether to either grant or grant in part, so that you've got sidewalk on one side of the road and not the other, or the board can decide not to grant it. We'll see where that goes. That was probably one that we can address tonight. Some of these others, I think we'd have to have some feedback. If the board doesn't have any other questions of the applicant, I will go for a public hearing. Okay. Any butters or citizens wish to weigh in and offer the board anything to consider on what the applicant has before us? Come on forward. Come on forward, sir. So please introduce yourself and tell us what's on your mind. Don't forget to sign in on the clipboard. And if you have property abutting this, we'll probably flip around to a chart where you can point it out just so we know what that looks like.
If I can. My name is Tony Capuccio. I live at 111 Wilson Hill Road, and I am an abutter, and I've been at this location for 30 years. First thing I've got is a question. It's probably a misunderstanding on my part. The board just voted to accept the application, and yet in the agenda for this meeting, there are 16 open items.
Sure. Accepting just means that it's a application that we can start to review. It
Okay,
starts
so
a review
those
period.
16 items are still TBDs then?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, we didn't approve any of those things. All that means is that they got to get through the gate with a complete application that's got enough information for us to consider, and that also starts a time period in the statute by which we've got to render a final decision, which is 60 or 65 days? 60 days.
Okay. The main point is, as it came up, the issues were both, runoff due to drainage and whatnot, but primarily water yield in the area. And at one time, at previous planning board meetings, there was a discussion, we're doing a comprehensive geographical evaluation of water availability, with test wells and whatnot. And the issues with such a study were cost. I believe a number like $100K was thrown about, and whether the predictive accuracy of that because of the fault lines and the cracks and so forth. Whether it would even be able to tell us anything with respect to impact on the abutters. So I have a suggestion for an alternative plan to establish a baseline for water yield and water quality for each abutter. And based on my cursory research, a water yield test goes for somewhere between $200 and $350, and a water quality test like the FHA VA test is $160. And so I believe for something like on the order of $500, we can get a baseline for that region, which has known water yield problems and potentially could have water quality problems. And my suggestion is that this be paid by the applicant. You know, are there tenant butters? So, you know, we're talking $5,000 versus $100,000. And at least it would establish a baseline from which, if there were problems, maybe some things could be figured out where the problem came from. I would also suggest that the town would be the one to establish the number, type, timing of the test so that it would form an adequate statistical baseline for future use. And that was my primary comment.
Thank you. Does any member of the board have any questions? Thank you for your comments.
I'll
I
ask
appreciate
a
it. Oh, I'm sorry. Mike has a question.
Mr. Cappuccio, if you could just provide us some detail about your well and if you've ever experienced any issues.
Sure. My well, I believe, is 220 feet deep. I don't know how deep the actual pump is. The well yield on the original application, I believe, something like 2.2 gallons per minute. It's, I believe, gone down. I don't have any measurements to that effect. But 2.2 requires, you know, some careful planning in terms of water usage, as you well may know. I've had many cases where I don't know whether the well went dry or a reset on the pump, but basically it kicks, the pump kicks out. I don't know whether that means the entire column is dry or that the thing has gotten overheated because it doesn't have enough cooling water, but basically kicks out. That happens on a fairly regular basis.
Did you have water last year during the major drought?
Yes, we did. I mean, it wasn't like we had to leave the house or anything. But that even required even more careful
rationing.
Rationing, exactly.
Could you identify your house for us with these numbers?
I'll try.
Yeah.
Yep.
4A16.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you for your testimony and thank you for signing in. Is there any other abutter who wishes to weigh in? Please come forward.
Hi, I'm Beth Bulluel at 103 Wilson Hill Road, and I'm butter. I have just two questions.
Okay.
I was curious about the green buffer area, that it's part of, you know, another lot. So how, like legally over time, how does that stay a green conservation area?
Okay, that's a good question. No, benefit for everyone. So what he's got to do to establish a conservation easement is you actually deed an easement to somebody. That could be the homeowners association. It could be the Town of Merrimack Conservation Commission, which is probably most likely. It could be to any other private entity like the Society for the Protection of New Hampshire Forests, or there's all sorts of entities that do this. They become stewards of the land, and they're the ones that now make sure that it will continue to be what it's supposed to be. And there's kind of another level of protection that's a little bit different as well. If anybody ever came forward to the planning board or the zoning board to say, I want to build a house there, the documents will be at the Registry of Deeds and within our own plans to say that this easement exists, and they would never get through the planning board's approval or review to actually construct something there. So on the idea that somebody's going to, you know, a conservation easement is allowed to have people walk through or recreate or snowshoe or hunt or all of those kinds of things. So there's no restriction on those kinds of things. If they were doing something that somehow wasn't consistent with a conservation easement, anybody could report them to the holder of the conservation easement and say, hey, they're doing X, Y, and Z, they shouldn't, and then they could enforce that. One of the things that's worth knowing, a lot of conservation easements don't prevent timbering because timbering can be good. I'm not saying that they're going to or that they should, but it can be important forest management to clear out the older, and I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but I've seen more than a few people surprised by the idea that people can cut trees on conservation land at times under the right circumstances. So, but that's sort of how that protection occurs. It's independent of Mr. Vaughn and independent of his homeowners. Somebody other than them would be the ones that are charged with maintaining the easement.
Okay, thanks. One other question, which really isn't related to the lots, but it's more a concern.
Let's see if they get you the portable microphone if you're going to stand up.
It's right in front of you.
Oh, there it is. Might already be on.
I just wanted to point out, let's see.
Go ahead.
I'm more concerned there's a lot of lots, there's going to be a lot more traffic on the road. And probably not.
You're 4A20, so you're only a tip of your lot is showing on that.
There's one that shows it.
There you are.
Oh yeah, okay. So I'm here. So there'll be 12 more houses. There's also a bunch more lots down the other end of the road. So there's going to be a lot more traffic on this road. And when my lot is right here, and this is a very dangerous corner, curve. So I believe that the same issue is for Mike Redding here. When you're driving this way and you go to take a left-hand turn into your driveway, it's completely blind. So you kind of look, hope no one's coming, take a quick left up the hill, and hope you don't get hit. And I know there's going to be a brand new 16-year-old driver next door. So she's...
One of yours, Mike? Congratulations.
So I don't know if there's anything that town can do.
I've backed out of Mike's driveway and I've seen it as well.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. That's where they go off the road. Well, they'll end up in the retaining pond now, but most of the time. But
yeah, so Wilson Hill Road definitely has got some uniquenesses that many of us have noticed. Nelson used to live on it. Mike still lives on it. I've been on it to get to Mike's house or just to go down it. It's narrow. It's not well positioned in its right of way. It gets wider and more narrow, and some places it's got trees. And my wife ruined her mirror on somebody's mailbox. And
is that what happened?
might be your no, it wasn't. So I get the idea that it's got those kinds of issues. Whether the town chooses to take up any of those at some point when Wilson Hill's being repaved, if that ever comes up, well, it will come up
or
eventually.
some type of a mirror so people can see.
Yep. So could be possible. I would think that probably, I don't want to send you sort of around the long way with the barn, but there's a highway safety committee that can deal with some of those issues, and then those issues can ultimately end up being incorporated into a CIP to do those things, but then it needs the votes and the support and the funding and all of the things that I couldn't guarantee, or even some of those committees can't, but that's how the idea could get started to see where it goes. I think along Wilson Hill Road there's a few people who privately have put up a little of those fisheye mirrors on the tree across from their driveway or something like that, and I don't know how those, when you're putting it on the property across the road from you, I'm not sure how you decide that you've got the right to do that, but maybe you just ask the neighbor and see if they'll let you.
Maybe on the new telephone pole. I don't know.
Well, there you go. So I don't know that there's as many private solutions as there are potentially going through the proper channels within the town to see if that idea can get. It's a difficult one because Wilson Hill Road is long and narrow and old, and the houses are close to it in some places, and I don't know that it'll ever be kind of reconfigured so that the whole of Wilson Hill Road is the 24 feet that we're talking about on these new subdivisions. I don't think that the paved way on Wilson Hill Road is probably 20 feet in some spaces. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions by members of the board? No. Okay, thank you. Other butters or citizens who wish to weigh in? Going once, going twice. Captain Manueli.
John Manueli, Fire Marshal. I just wanted to elaborate again on the cistern situation so that everyone's clear on that. And first, I want to say that we are absolutely working with the developer, Mr. Vaughn, on this situation. I have had several conversations with him, and we are more than happy to continue working with him to get what we need to get. The situation with cisterns in Merrimack is we currently do not have any cisterns. We have asked for them in the past. The first time was on the Tinker Road, Portside Drive, Holt's Landing development. In that case, we asked for two 30,000-gallon cisterns. Initially, that's what the developer was going to do, and then he decided to bring town water in instead, which eliminated the need for the cisterns. The other one was Crestview Circle. Now, Crestview Circle is I believe it's 7 or 8 lot subdivision on Lawrence Road. The difference between this one and that is that the nearest hydrant is not more than half a mile, I believe, from Lawrence Road. In this particular case, with this development, it's a 13 lot subdivision, and the nearest hydrant is well over 1.5 miles. It's at the corner of McQuestion and Wilson Hill Road. And as was just discussed, Wilson Hill Road is not a easy road to navigate. It's also one of the farthest roads from the fire station. What the cisterns will give us is basically 60,000 gallons of reliable water, not only for this development, but for all of the houses' protection in the area and woodland fires. And currently, Mr. Vaughn has 3 proposals that you've put through with like another 6 lots possible.
Oh, you mean some of the ones across the street? Yeah,
Yeah.
there have been a couple.
There's no more in the future.
Potentially, there's 6 more.
Or the ones that have already been approved.
Right. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So that brings us up to about 18, I believe 18 or 19 homes potentially in the area. So our thinking is that if we can have 60,000 gallons of reliable water source, this is going to basically benefit the entire area as well as his development. And 60,000 gallons is actually the minimum required under an FPA fire flows for development of this size.
Okay.
So, again, we are more than willing to work with him on alternatives. Home sprinklers are great. I love home sprinklers. The issue with a home sprinkler is it's in a well situation. We are not on town water. You've got about 300 gallons of usable water. That will allow you to control a fire and to get the family out of the house, but it will not save a house typically, unless you have a small trash can fire. It's there to keep the fire in check for us to get out there. Typically, I believe it's probably a 10-minute run from Central to that location on Wilson Hill Road. So there's not a lot of time.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the applicant's suggestion about a fire pond instead of a cistern?
Fire ponds, the problem with a fire pond is it's not a guaranteed amount of water. It's subject to too many variables. Drought, it's subject to winter. You basically lose a portion of it to ice in the winter. I'm not saying we're not going to look at it, but we need more data on how big it is, how much usable water is, and that type. It's also more maintenance intensive. You have to make sure that you don't have vegetation growth that's blocking the inlet pipe, and make sure you don't have silt, that type of thing. A cistern is a 30,000-gallon water tank. It's pretty much a maintenance-free, for 50 years, if installed properly, tank of water that is guaranteed to be there whether you have a drought or not.
How was a cistern prevented from freezing?
They're buried. They're underground by a certain
get-
depth. So
get
it's just
down on that
basically
depth, so it's not
the
an
earth, keeps them from freezing.
Okay. Thank you for being willing to answer this. Oh, Mike, I'm sorry, go ahead.
If you could just also, is there any maintenance to them once you put the water in it?
Typically, maintenance for a cistern, and I have checked with other towns around us that do have a lot of cisterns, is painting the piping every 3 to 5 years and maintaining the grass around it, making sure that you don't have trees growing on top of it where you're going to have roots getting into the cistern. Cistern can either be made out of plastic or concrete. Typically, if it's concrete and you have a tree growing on it, you're going to end up with the root getting down into it. So cutting trees away from it and that type of thing is pretty much most of the maintenance that's required.
Does the water have to be chlorinated, or is there a
No.
chance that you have any sort of algae?
Typically, it's
growth?
pool water that's put in there, and it's just water.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
How do you get the water in there?
You basically get a pool truck to drop off the water. You'll do a tanker shuttle, that type of thing. If we were to use, say, 5,000 gallons of water, we could, arrange for a tanker shuttle from maybe Amherst Fire could bring one of their tankers. They have a 3,000-gallon tanker. They could fill it back up, or you could just, get a 10,000-gallon tanker from a pool company.
Thank you for answering all the questions, and I had suspected that there was more to know about sprinklers than I knew, and that's why you're the expert and I'm not. If there's no other questions, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there other abutters or citizens who wish to weigh in? Seeing none, let's close the public hearing and call the applicant back up to respond to some of the things that have been discussed and see where we go. I think it's good to have had Captain Manueli here to describe some of the issues that he has, but I think we defer to go have a private conversation and sort that out, and whatever you guys come up with is gonna, as long as everybody's satisfied with it, will be fine with us. We don't need to necessarily put you on the spot tonight and have you commit to cisterns or something else. But some of the other things that you heard, I think one of the applicants had talked about doing some pre-development testing on wells, and the other applicant really wanted to know more about the other abutter wanted to know more about the green space behind and how that would be maintained, as well as traffic.
So as far as the wells go, I don't really have anything else to say about the wells. But the green space, I'm open to wording however they want to back there. I'm sure we could say that they can't cut timber if that makes sense to everybody.
And sometimes it makes sense to do that, and I didn't mean to create, light a fire on somebody where they wouldn't work.
No, it makes sense.
Whatever works.
But certainly, I understand that it's going to be deeded that way, and we maybe can even make it bigger. I mean, if we're going to have to go to the Conservation Commission to talk to them if they want it at some point anyway, I guess. So I got to put that on the list. Maybe they want that other section too, because I think that even though you have to cross the road, I think that starts to touch conservation land on the other side. I don't know. Do you?
I don't know for sure, but
it's
I think
close.
so.
Yeah, I think it does.
So they probably would like that.
They do like to see the parcels become contiguous because it lets not that wildlife are going to stop because there's a dotted line on a piece of paper, but if there was ever a development back there that would interrupt, conservation land that's isolated becomes less usable if it's physically isolated, not if it's on paper isolated. That won't matter. Okay. So where do we stand with it? I'm sorry, go ahead. Any questions?
I just had a question on the easement. Did you intend for it to have public access, like hunters and just recreational? Because it looks like they could access it from the road and then go all the way down to South Grader. So it looks like it could be a path.
Well,
if it had that purpose.
That said, I think before you think of hunters, remember that hunters can't discharge weapons within so many feet of homes and stuff like that. So they're not going to be looking for a deer there, but they may walk through there to get to the bigger parcel in the back.
Where are you talking? Oh, where are you talking about exactly?
So right there's your frontage, right?
Yeah.
And is that all conservation up through to the road?
Yeah.
I believe so.
Right.
Yeah.
So
That's
if
the
it's
idea.
considered a conservation easement, is it allowing for public access conservation easement, or is it simply just a green space that you're creating as part of your lot that can never be developed?
I just think I should talk to the abutters and see how they want it and what makes sense to everybody. And because I don't care. I know that spot there is in the engineering. There's a huge water retention area there, so it's not like they pull in there and park. Because I think it fills that whole, part of our drainage plan is there.
And they would be able to pull off to the side of the road.
Yeah, I guess they still could.
But
yeah, I certainly will talk to the people that have shown concern, and I'll pretty much word it however they want, and go to the Conservation Commission and see, if they want it or.
Yeah,
hopefully they do, because I don't, there's no homeowners association to.
Well, if you have cisterns, maybe you'll have that too. The Conservation Commission is typically looking for things, I don't want to speak for them, but my understanding is that they usually are looking for things that have public access because it's a town entity and they're going to maintain land that's in conservation for the public's benefit. That doesn't mean to say that there isn't some other entity that has a different view of it. And again, I could be speaking out of school because I don't speak for them.
If you look at the topography on that little strip of land that goes across, it's pretty steep.
Yeah.
It's sloping, guys, not something.
There's
Nobody's
a
going to
pretty-
walk on that
Nobody's
path?
gonna
Oh, there's a
walk
pretty
on-
good deer trail back there too. So, so I could see how a guy might say, hey, I'll set up right there.
Yeah.
But,
He's got to
there's
get
a-
by you, Brad.
It's got to get by me, yeah. Yeah, most people know I don't want them up there.
Okay.
Just say, I
But
think
it
it's
is pretty
important for
steep.
the abutters to know whether or not that is areas that they can access. If they're going to try to get, like, if the Capuchios want to access and go all the way up through
Right.
there to go to South Grader, then they would know that they could access that.
That I assumed would definitely allow access for the abutters to use or do whatever they wanted with
Okay.
it. From the beginning, I assumed that part. I guess I always thought that's something we'll work on later, and I guess it's later.
It's later,
So it's
yeah.
time to.
Well,
time
you
to
know, it isn't necessarily
figure it
final
out.
answer time, but ultimately, if there's going to be a conservation easement, one of the conditions of approval that the planning board usually imposes is that the language of the easement be approved by the town's legal counsel so that we understand what's
Yeah,
in it. and stuff
I'll
like
get
that.
on it.
Alistair, you have a question?
In preparation tonight, I went through the Emery and Garrett groundwater investigation report dated May 4th, and I know that's 2016, not 2017. They, in their last conclusions, made a comment that the applicant carries out hydrogeologic testing. Has that been done?
No. In our last meeting, we addressed all of the different reports. If we want to talk about, if we need to talk about the water again, I can bring my notes back and talk. I thought the discussion was over. But yeah, that test was not 100, it was like $250,000 test.
I know it was,
That in
yeah.
their own words, at the very end of that, said that the nature of the science is that you would never over time be able to prove one way or another.
I understand.
So there's a bunch of water up there, there's plenty. The engineers have said there could be 4 times as many houses up there. There's no well ever going to be far enough away from another well that a fracture in a piece of granite in this state isn't going to touch it. So my well touches your well.
I hear you. I asked the question.
Okay, so no.
Well, you haven't done it because
we don't
it was too
intend to
expensive.
do that.
Well, no, that's why
And-
you went back and redesigned his
and
subdivision
that's why
and met with the
I
neighbors.
honestly thought I
No,
tried to make the calls, and I thought we
I
had.
just wanted to know.
No, you have done quite a lot of work, and you deserve to be acknowledged for that. So I know that in your plans, you've got well locations picked out in these lots. Are these established, or are these proposed, or
Just
contingent on,
just
or they could
proposed.
work here?
I'm sorry.
Right, they're just proposed. They can
Okay.
go, they meet the requirements for the setbacks. They're on the lots, wholly on the lots. But as far as the actual location, when it comes time to build, they can certainly move as long as they meet DES requirements.
Okay. I know that they appear to be positioned central or even further away, central to the lots or even further away from the abutters, and that seemed to be deliberate to give you even some more distance between the two.
Well, and once again, the topography of the way we've got this laid out right now, where the lots that, I hate to say close to abutters, because these abutters aren't going to see these homes. This isn't a cluster like we came in for in the beginning. We're turned down because there's too many houses. It's a very conservative, spacing, but the distance, those 3 that are on the south side, let me get back up to my thing. The 3 that are on the south side have a small area of flat that would be right where a house is going to be built, and then there's that extreme topography down the back that I don't know why anybody would want to go so far down the hill to pump water and pump it back up the hill, unless, I guess, if there's an extreme case where they're having, I could dictate it if we had to, I guess, to say they're not going to be.
You don't for my benefit. I was just observing that the lots what appeared on the plan
They
was a couple hundred feet away from the property line for the abutters, and I don't necessarily know where their wells are on theirs, but I thought that you had gone to some length there to give yourself as much room between you and them as possible.
That
Plus,
was-
you've lowered it down to 3 lots that are proximate to theirs, and even those that are proximate are still some distance away, but beyond those 3, I think that you've gotten enough distance where there's just really no point in having a conversation about water supply or the interconnectivity anymore.
Well, I have to say, Mr. Chairman, I can't agree with you. I still fear the wrath of the people on Wilson Hill Road and their water supply, which we know from their testimony has never been brilliant, dries up. And whilst I understand what it would have cost Mr. Vaughan to do what Emmerich and Garrett suggested, I can't go to bed at night without worrying what's going to happen if everybody's optimistic forecasts come to fruition. I still fear people on Wilson Hill Road, the people on the bottom, are going to find themselves with little or no water. If they're already having to manage when the lady is able to run the washing machine now, I cannot, on conscience, not worry about it.
Fair enough. That's your comment. Mike?
I still am very skeptic about whether or not the subdivision can provide that adequate water. It's a challenging predicament. Different than like the cul-de-sac, where we have an entity that we can rely upon as part of our regulations that protects that benefit of the public. We don't have a voice that speaks for that in this case. MVD is not the jurisdiction that weighs in on this. And the only regulation that we have is when they go to actually do the well, they have to meet a state standard. But we all know that when you put that well in, it may meet that standard that day. But we're finding that even I found it with my own well, even though I've improved it, I still see a much lower yield now that I've had it installed and been used. So it's challenging because I feel like, there's no regulation that subjects Mr. Vaughan to a certain standard that he has to meet or demonstrate, but I still feel like there's a due diligence that we need to do here for these future homeowners, and certainly for the town, in the sense that if you had half of these homes have really problematic wells that are now very challenged with where they can do further, add more wells because of the steep slopes behind their lot and a septic system in the front, we're just in a very awkward predicament again, and I think you alluded to it earlier with another applicant. If we can solve that problem today, maybe we're not working through other issues, and certainly having to try to figure out how to bring water to these folks is a very
that makes sense.
challenging one.
Let me ask you a little bit more about your comment, because you were speaking in terms of supplying water to Mr. Vaughan's lots, and I'm not sure that that's in doubt at all. I think whether he'll have an impact on his neighbor's lots is the question. Correct or no?
I'm concerned about whether or not there's enough water for these lots.
That they won't be able to get a working well on the lots that he's drawn?
And where I draw that from is that based upon the information that we've gathered from wells that have been upgraded, including my own, the recent ones that have been installed on the other side of Wilson Hill, further east, and then the one that was installed up South Greater, they all came in very low relatively, but met the standard, but since then have had problems. And I suspect that once the new house gets going, there's certainly the potential. Just the way that the geology is set up and with the evidence that we've seen so far, it lends itself. Again, no evidence, nothing that I can prove.
Yeah.
And if we were able to put in, say, 3 of these wells and do a drawdown test over a certain period of time, we could stress the aquifer and get to know that, but at a very expensive cost and something that's really not precedent, certainly in this town.
Sure.
So a very, very significant hardship to the applicant, just to demonstrate that.
So I know that Emery and Garrett had said this notion of a hydrogeology test is possible. I didn't take from their recommendation that they were suggesting that it had to be done. But the balance of their report and some of the stuff from the drilling company, Skilling, is that right?
Yeah.
Some of the others have been pretty clear, pretty definitive of whether they think that he can find water on his lots. I don't know, I know that there's some skepticism because of the experience of the neighbors in terms of what impact it will have on them, but I haven't gotten, beyond skepticism, I don't see where the evidence is coming from for doubt about the water that he'll be able to supply to his own lots. He may have to go deep, but so be it. I mean, that's the consequence when you build a new home. You know, they're not going to get a CO without a water supply. So,
I think that's the case anywhere you go, whether it's Merrimack or Amherst or anywhere in the state or anywhere in the country. When you drill a well, you don't know. There is some level of uncertainty, you know, on where you're going to hit water. Typically, it's, you know, there's a lot more discussion than I've been part of as far as the wells go, but you know, there's always that decision as to how far you need to go. Whether they're, I don't know of any homes that have been built that couldn't get water, and everybody takes that risk building a home. I built a new home a couple of years ago, and when I asked the drillers how much it was going to cost and how deep they had to go, they said, well, we don't know. I mean, typically in this area, it's been about this deep, but it's something that no one can really know, or I think should be expected to burden other landowners with. The only way to supply water is to have, you know, a public water supply, obviously, for sure. But
I tend to agree with that. I mean, I think that if you're building a new home on a vacant lot, it's up to you to decide what to build, how big of a house, how nice of a house, and how you're going to provision it with electricity or water or other things. And if it costs you more than you were expecting, that's kind of the market. That's buyer beware. What impact that has on the guy who didn't develop or build anything, that's sort of the question. And, you know, that's what we've got some of these reports for, talking about, well, what can you say, what can you know scientifically about how one thing nearby another thing affects the others? Even if you can say that a lot of wells are not highly productive, and maybe his won't be highly productive either, that still doesn't cross the gap to say that these two things will impact each other. They could just be two low yielding wells nearby. When you get wells that are that far apart from each other, I just defy anyone to come up with a science other than doing a hydrogeology test to be able to say that I can say with some degree of reliability that two wells 300 feet apart are going to impact each other on the level of three residential wells. Not talking about putting a bottling plant in here. So that's my thought.
Yeah, and I certainly appreciate that. And again, like I said, I'm just struggling and really just kind of voicing an opinion of maybe a community, a small community, that similar to the voices that we're hearing along this section, if in the future that is the case, is that truly fair, and could we have done a better job now? And I guess the only analogy I would make is that if this was septic, if we knew that there was traditional, or there was historic issues with septic systems failing and limited ability to make improvements by those existing homes, and then we're finding similar conditions at this site, but yet they pass the minimum standards, as a board we have I guess, not the due diligence, but the responsibility to act upon that information, or is it simply just, we say it's circumstances, it's buyer beware, and it's not in our ability to regulate?
So I have had some, outside the planning board, my day job, situation with lots that have limited space to redevelop septic systems if the septic systems fail. And the usual approach from DES is that you've got a note on the plan and a warning to the applicant that if it has to be replaced, it may have to be replaced in the same footprint, and that adds enormously to the cost of repairing a septic system when you have to do it in the same hole. But other than that, I don't know of a lot of things that are done in other places that deal with that kind of a question. It's sort of like, let everybody be aware that there's this problem out there, and if you choose to proceed and buy one of his lots and go for your building permits, you got to take what you get, or study it, or do your own due diligence ahead of time, or however you solve that problem. I think that when we began this discussion about water and water supply, I didn't know very much about how water worked. But we've gotten, I think there was more than just Emery and Garrett and
Hydrological survey.
and Skilling. Brett, you had to comment?
Well, I just wanted to add to that. Yes, there were more than 3. So when we had the initial discussion, this board had asked me, hey, we're not experts, hire an expert. So that's what I did. I hired an expert, and he wrote up a document stating that there was way more water up there than needed for the amount of houses that we're proposing, and that the likelihood of one well affecting another to be connected is probably high, but to affect it was nil. But he's
Which
an
one
engineer.
of the reports was that?
That was the first report. I forget who we hired. It was recommended by Michael.
Claude Cormier of HydroSource Associates.
HydroSource. Then we said, hey, we don't understand what that says, so we came back and had another meeting. Everybody said, we're not sure what he said, so bring him in. And he came in, and you asked the questions directly, and he answered them. And some of the abutters said, we don't care what he says. We don't have very good water. And you said, God, this is frustrating. I'm not sure where we can go from here. So then you said, let's hire another guy to see what the other guy's report was. So I paid to hire the engineering firm that
Emery and Garrett.
Emery and Garrett.
Yep.
They, as you would expect from a peer review, made it clear that everything about the other report wasn't exactly 100% correct, but in their own report stated that the big question that we're worried about here isn't who's going to have water, it's if it's going to affect another well. That's when the suggestion, that company would be happy to do a $250,000 study, and at the very end of that said, but you still can't tell based on over time how fractures and things change. So we went through it all, and there was some question even from one of the board members sitting over here that I'm not even sure this is our authority, and that a man has the right to dig a well on his property anywhere else. It had never been any different. I even went as far as to check what DES recommends, what the regulations are, because we're always talking about the regulations. You just mentioned it a few times. According to the regs, there is no reg. There's no regulation. There's the DES puts out a suggested, I forget the exact term. I wish I didn't realize we were getting back into this tonight, but a suggested minimal amount for a well, and it was less than anybody has here in this group. It's less. And less water, it's all about the tube and how deep it is and whatever, but everybody's met at this point, even the ones that are saying, I'm run out of water. Well, the state says that's the minimum suggested. So even after saying all of that, and after the engineer saying that they're not going to affect the other wells, the abutters that have wells right next to each other's lots are maybe affecting each other's wells, but these are several hundred feet away. And Skillings, that's right, he was the first one that said, several hundred feet away, the chances are nil, but he wasn't a scientist, so then we went through the scientists. So then you said, let's talk this over and see what we can do to make the situation better, and that's what we've been doing for a long time. And
thank you for going through the history and reminding us about those studies. I had remembered the substance without knowing the number of documents or the places that they had come from. I guess the point to all of that stuff is, I don't know what more we could fairly ask of the applicant to do to prove this situation or redesign his subdivision to accommodate these things. I understand people's concerns because of the kinds of concerns they are, but well, I can't think of anybody else that we've put through this much of an effort to try to prove a point when all that stands on the other side of the argument is skepticism. I mean, there isn't a scientist on the other side saying A is going to affect B.
The only, well, I think that there were a couple of comments, but the state geologist had made a written argument.
Yes, and I reread the state's geologist report in here, and I can go get it again, because it didn't say, it didn't argue the point of those engineers. It was, I guess I have to go get this state's geologist saying, I'll bring that back next week and we can go through this again. But there is skepticism. You said, hire an engineer. I hired an engineer. And then the engineer, he said, bring him in here, and I paid to bring him in here. And then he said, hire another engineer and bring him in here. And then people that aren't engineers are saying, I'm still skeptical. I understand, you're a neighbor. You got to do your best point for these people, right? You're in a butter. You're a butter, you're on the board. Say it, but to some point, there's nothing else I can do. And I just respectfully don't believe. I think the board is trying to find a way to get involved in something that's not even the jurisdiction of the board.
And that's my point. And not necessarily that, I just want to make sure that as we make a decision, and bridging off of what Alistair said earlier, is that it's a conundrum. There's nothing that I don't think that we can point to specifically like Captain Manueli's recommendation, in that, however, there's a line of evidence that leads to, I think, a hypothesis, or at least a conclusion, that we can't ignore. And so
you're saying there's a line of evidence. Okay, so the well studies, how much well water everybody's got? What is the line of evidence that's telling you that for some reason digging a well on Wilson Hill is worse than digging a well somewhere else? Because there's a few people that have a bad well that have brought it up. But if you look at the studies, yes. I mean, this last Emery and Garrett, the final guy, he says when he did his averages, he left out all the high producing ones and still called it an average, which I thought was interesting. He says, okay, we're doing an average, but we're going to leave out the high producing ones. And still, the wells that are existing, the average, hell, I don't even have to say the average, the least producing still produce more than DES suggests is a minimum requirement. So I don't understand the science that you're talking about that says different. I understand your skepticism.
Say science, I said line of evidence.
Line of evidence.
Yeah, and so my line of evidence is that we have existing wells, we have existing residents who have been trying to work and improve their wells, and they've had a very challenging go at it, and that there is a strong likelihood that when you add 13 opportunities, probability-wise, that you're
13 over what space? I mean, we might as well say 100 and just go out 4 miles. I mean, we're not talking about close proximity here at all. These are not close. And when we say that people have had problems, I know the Woods have had a problem. They've had a serious problem. They're stuck. They're in a crummy spot there with their well. But for the last abutter that just sat up here said he's got a 250-foot well. Mine's 1,400. These poor son of a guns that are going to buy these lots up there are going to probably dig 1,400. I don't know that everybody's tried that hard to get more water. I know it's been very voiced and it's been very emotional, but I don't see the evidence or the line of evidence or the engineering. I mean, we hired the engineers. They don't work for me.
Thank you for your response on that. Bill, does your comment relate to the water, or is it on a different?
No, it relates to the water.
Okay, let's hear.
I'm new to this whole conversation. I've read the information that was in my packet. I know this has been going on for 2 years. I've heard stuff on the periphery, but I've never dealt with this. So this is the first time I'm looking at this. So I want you to understand that.
Okay.
Okay? When I read the minutes of Mr. Cormier, where he talks about Average daily groundwater withdrawal estimated 6,000 to 8,000 gallons per day, which is a small percentage of the 150 gallons per day estimated to be available within the aquifer in this watershed. And then I look at the peer review report that tells me 80% are only getting 2 gallons per minute. Something's wrong. The math doesn't add up. And I'm not going to be here a month from now. It'll be my colleague that'll be forced to make this particular decision about what Mr. Redding said about a conundrum. And I agree with him, this is a conundrum. But if it was me right here, I would be asking you to go back and try to figure out a way to make it work. Because, and I understand it's your wallet, it's your money. I absolutely respect that. But at the same token, when I look at one of your consultant coming in saying 150,000 gallons, and I'm looking at 80% of that area only getting access to 2 gallons per minute, it doesn't jive.
I know, once again, you're using the first engineer talked about how much water's on the hill. That's what he's talking about, how much water's in that mountain. Then you're going back to Emmett and Garrett, who says only 80% after he gets rid of the high producers is only 2 gallons a minute. I don't know. I don't know what the rest of the town or the rest of the state is, but according to DES, that's way substantial.
And I don't know that because you have data that I'm not privy to that I'm probably going to go home tonight and Google because I'm curious about it.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn
about what DES has to say about it. And I think people know me from my work on the council, the concerns that I have for water usage and the quality of water in this community. So this is kind of something that I've been focused on. But in the same token, what if Emory Garrett came back and said that 80% were getting 10 gallons per minute, a higher level as opposed to a low level per minute, then I can kind of sort of rationalize 150,000 gallons being available on the. It tells me that there's access, that there's flow. But when you're looking at 80% of 2 gallons per minute, and I'm not a scientist. You know,
Thank you.
I don't mean to.
My point,
I'm not a
and
caveman.
I understand it's emotional.
What I can read. It just doesn't. It doesn't add up, Mr. Vaughn.
I think we've obviously gone over this a lot, in the last 2 years, and I think the bottom line is that, we're all judged by or have to meet requirements. Mr. Vaughn, the wells that are affected meet the state's requirements. I mean, those are the things that we're looking at. They may be low producing, but at 80%, I haven't read that report. I don't know where those wells are drilled. There's so many variables, the depth that we don't know. But I do know that this was hashed out to the nth degree for the last couple of years. And I also know that Mr. Vaughn has gone above and beyond to redesign this subdivision to help to work with the abutters and to help and make them comfortable with what he's asking for.
And respectfully, Chris, that point's not lost on me because I wrote down the number of different lots that he had presented throughout the particular time, so I'm aware of that.
So I do want to talk a little bit about the history because I think that Brett is right in terms of what we've asked him to do and what he's done in response to it. And although I'm sure he'd rather not have spent money on doing all of those things, he's done a lot. He's done an awful lot. And the consistent answer that we get back is to the 2 questions: can he supply his own lots? And that I've never seen anyone in any report doubt that. Can he supply his own lots with water? Will it be at 240 feet or 1,400 feet? I don't know, and it doesn't really matter. That's for those people that are going to build there to determine and sort out. But nobody in any of these reports have expressed any doubt at all, including the guy that would be on the rig drilling for the well, expressed concern about those things. Now, will it affect the neighbors? That's been the question that we've been worried about before, and I agree with Mike that is a serious concern that everybody has to worry about. The question about that, and what I've understood from reading all of these reports over and over and over again, is that what you're going to get from scientists is a sense of probabilities. Nobody's going to say for certain what's interconnected below the ground and what would have an impact. We've heard even from some of the neighbors who have complained about water, how the neighbor had drilled in one spot and come up with nothing after a great deal of exhaustive effort, and 6 feet over came up with a well that was productive, or at least to some degree. That could be all the difference that it makes, to make a lot of difference in what's going on in the ground. When 6 feet can make all the difference in the world, what can 300 feet do? And the possibility that residential water use is something like 150 gallons a person a day. So you're talking about homes with 2 or 3, 4 people living in there, 300, 400, 500 gallons being drawn out of those houses per day for 3 houses.
That's right.
Round it all up and call it 2,000 total gallons coming out of those 3 houses that are, close to those things. Can drawing 3,000 gallons of water or 2,000 gallons of water, and again, that's a high estimate, 300 feet away from a well, have a reliably scientific impact on these neighbors to the point that we ought to tell this guy he can't go ahead with his program. And I cannot defend the position that says at several hundred feet away, we've got to worry about 3 residential wells. There's nothing that the scientists have told me that have said that concern is one that we should really be thinking is going to be practical and develop here. That said, there's a discussion to be had about the abutters and their wells and how they've been and whether they've had challenges, and they have. They've no question talked about how seasonally, sometimes in July and August, on a normal year with nothing else going on, having some difficulty with their wells in the past. If this development impacts that matters, but those problems pre-exist, and he didn't cause them with this development. He didn't make that happen. He doesn't have to solve that problem for these neighbors. He's only got to make sure that he's not doing anything to impact it. Whether or not any of that stuff is within our jurisdiction, we have some loose stuff in our statute that says we can look out for safety and health and those kinds of concepts. That's the extent of our jurisdiction for looking at these kinds of things. So. I think that I wish that we had a definitive answer, a black and white answer, but I think that I've heard enough to support the applicant on this water question. I don't know what else we could demand of the guy. Do you put in the 3 residential wells? And I mean, that's not a $250,000 hydrogeology test. That's whatever 3 wells cost, and turn them on and let them run. It's not free, but it's probably $30,000 instead of $250,000. But even then, somebody will say, well, you did it in January and we need you to do it in August. And then somebody else will say, you did it in August, but I want to see what September looks like.
It goes back to some of the same conversations we had when we were talking about the Merrimack Premium Outlets relating to fracking and the water issue on the table, potentially the water impacting the neighborhood. It's the same story. It's the same, different location, obviously, but the concepts, the mechanics is still the same.
I agree with that, and I wasn't on the board for how those votes got ultimately resolved, but the only thing that I can do as an approach is take the information from the people that have written us reports. Are they absolutely certain? No, they can't be. But do they generally say, hey, there's enough reason to believe that this will work? I think all of them say that. Anyway, since we're not at the point of considering conditional final approval, this doesn't have to be the last discussion about this or any other matter. There are a number of things on this proposal that have to be discussed other than water and perhaps updated and changed. I think we're going to have some adjustments to the cul-de-sac, and I think that they'll have to sort out whether they need some variances and whether the board is willing to take variances under advisement or want to see those happen first. There's probably a handful of other things that need to have happened as well, and Jillian can probably fill in some more meat on those bones as far as what would need to happen before we get to the point of making a final decision.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely CLD review that we will still need to go through. We would like to receive more town department comments and review those as well. And
There's some
there-
waivers on the table that require some feedback from the town departments as well.
Yeah. So those are the main ones.
I had suggested before that we could, if we chose to, take up the question, the fellow's sidewalk waiver. If we chose to do that. It's been done. This is
Is
from a
it?
year ago. We're here at final application.
all right, okay.
Show me some old stuff.
We haven't a formal thing, so, okay.
Yeah, we just accepted it as complete a little while ago. Mike, you have a comment, question?
I was just going to start the discussion about the sidewalk.
Okay.
Yeah,
Please.
I think, similar to what we were talking about before, the sidewalks are important for communities like this. I think that the idea of offering a waiver for one side would be very practical in the sense. I think that there's some great value in the sidewalks, that we've demonstrated that in the past, especially with a road like Wilson Hill. If folks in this community are looking to just walk and enjoy the neighborhood, it offers them that opportunity to do that without the encumbrances of vehicle traffic. So, and then if it ties into some sort of connection with regards to the bus stop, I think, which will be the case, I would imagine that the kids will have to be there at the end of Oak Ridge, if that's the name of the road, and I think it would serve a good purpose, certainly on at least one side.
I agree with that. Other comments or questions?
I had to make that a
What's the
motion.
will of the
Mr.
board?
Chairman, I would move that the planning board waive the sidewalk requirement as strict conformity would pose an unnecessary hardship to the applicant, and the waiver would not be contrary to the spirit or intent of the regulation.
Noting that it'll be built on one side.
Knowing that it'll be built on one side or the
On one
other,
side.
depending on what the applicant
Okay.
chooses to do.
Is there a second for Councilor Boyd's motion? Second by Desiree. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? So that deals with the sidewalk bit. I think the other waivers you've requested require us to get a little more feedback
No,
from.
Mr. Chairman, could I make out, also has got a waiver under 412C regarding the length of the cul-de-sac, because it's obviously going to be more than 1,200 feet. I think we could give them the comfort knowing that we aren't going to raise that as an issue.
I think that whether or not we raise that as an issue is resolved by this cistern situation, because they've got to have the fire department satisfied that they can get their hoses
Yeah, I'd agree
run
with
around.
that.
But it's still going to be over 1,200 feet.
It will be, but whether they've got to do it with a cistern, or whether they do fire hydrants, or whether they got to do some other things, may make the applicant want to decide how
Okay.
they approach it. I could tell you, if it's sort of just taking the pulse of the board, if the fire department is satisfied with what you've done for them with water, then the road length won't be an issue for me.
Correct.
And I think that that's going to be pretty consistent for most of us.
Yeah.
If they're satisfied with what they want to do. So we've got CLD comments, there'll be some changes to the road layout, there may be a need for some waiver, some variances. What's the will of the board with respect to variances? Do you want to see those done, or are they basically kind of ministerial, since they're things that have been granted before, but the call out of number of feet is slightly different?
I think the ministerial.
Oh, yes.
So if the applicant,
subject.
they can be conditions
I
of
would think.
approval if we get to approval
Yeah.
on the application.
It's on the footage
Yep.
that they have on the front. There's
So-
gonna be more when they make the
If we decide that we can't make a decision tonight, what needs to happen between now and whenever we would take it up again? CLD is one of them. What else?
Agreement with the fire department.
Fire department?
Public Works.
Yep. You wanted to deal with that slope of the road for the first couple hundred feet, so deal with that with DPW.
The scaling.
Yeah, the scaling thing is, another one, probably DPW is the best one to ask whether they've got the information that they need for that. What's that?
CLD.
Yeah, CLD was the first thing, to make sure that we had a chance to review those things. Both CLD and DPW will weigh in on the road geometry as it meets, whether it's at an
Yes.
angle that's appropriate, and
Yeah,
it looks like it probably is.
Yeah.
Other things that need to happen between now and then?
Discussion with CONSCOM, maybe?
Where you at with the Conservation Commission?
No, I gotta talk to them, yeah.
Yeah, we'd ought to get that straightened
I
out.
I'll talk to the abutters and talk to cons.
Yeah.
Oh, in terms of taking care of the
See how
conservation
they want
easement.
it written up,
Yeah.
you know.
Okay. Anything else that needs to get addressed between now and next time? Okay, then what's the will of the board with respect to
May I-
when
Mr.
next time is?
May I, Mr. Chairman, subject of course to the approval of the applicant, I would make a motion that we continue this discussion until August the 15th at 7 p.m. in this room, with no further notice to abutters.
Is there a second for that motion?
Seconded.
Second by Mr. Boyd.
Is that date acceptable?
Yes.
Yes,
August 15th.
except we'll be right behind those long-winded guys that were here earlier.
Okay.
Maybe we'll reverse, maybe we'll switch you up. Bring your popcorn.
Same thing, we were a little long-winded ourselves.
Complicated projects, tough sites. If there's no further discussion, all in favor of continuing to August 15th, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstaining? Okay, so we will see you then. You got your list of things to get done, and we've got some things that will come to us.
Yes.
Thank you for your presentation and for working through the process and for working with your abutters. I think that really makes a difference. I know that there was still some testimony from some abutters, but clearly it's different than what it was before.
Thank you.
All right, somewhere in this stack I've got an agenda. I would know what to do next. Discussion and possible action regarding other items of concern. Does anyone have any discussion items of concern? The only thing that I would offer up is that we had an interview committee meeting before this one to consider the reappointment of both Lynn and Mike, who have volunteered to do so. The committee was kind of on the fence of what to do with them, but we decided we'd keep them for another couple of years. And they will go before the town council for potential approval on Thursday. There is another potential individual who is interested, so we may have another person that may want to be either a full member or an alternate member, depending on what we have available. I think that's always exciting and good to do, and some new person to say hello to. I won't worry about disclosing who the person is until that sort of becomes the process public, and let that play out. That's all that I have in other items of concern. Does anyone else have any to consider? No? Okay, then the next item is approval of the minutes of June 20th, 2017.
I move we approve as printed.
With a microphone on, Lynn moves to approve as printed.
And I second it.
Second by Alistair. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining?
And I'm
6-0-1 with Councillor Boyd abstaining.
And then I make a motion that we adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Second by Desiree. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 7-0-0. We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.